All right. Good evening. I'd like to call to order this work session today on December 5th. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion passes. First up on the agenda, we have item 2.01, Citizens Advisory Committee. Welcome, Dr. Shelton.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to present the recommendations for the Citizens Advisory Committee. I am very pleased to introduce Elaine Blummel and Stephen Hill. They are the co-chairs of the Citizens Advisory Committee and have worked in that role for a number of years and addressed the board on a number of topics. And so tonight they're here to do that as well. So Elaine and Stephen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm grateful to be here tonight, and Steve and I are going to just kind of go over the process that we went through at CAC while we examined all of the ideas around the proposed 2025 bond and the potential Prop C waiver. I hope you will forgive me if I look at my paper notes. I'm not as good at doing the electronics as everybody else is. So, but anyway, glad to be here tonight and grateful for this opportunity. So first, just want to review what Citizens Advisory is about. It's a committee of the board, and we are charged with the opportunity to study topics that are assigned to us by administration or by the Board of Education. We spend a lot of time learning about the details of the different things that are pertinent in any school year, and then ultimately make recommendations to the board. And they're made based on consensus vote of the members who are present in the meeting when we finally get to the end of a study period. It's a very cooperative group of people, and we have a lot of varied voices. We try very hard in terms of maintaining our membership to have a good representation of the community, initially trying to have someone at least from every school building, as well as parents of students that have graduated, parents of students that will be someday, that come to the district at some point, as well as stakeholders from around the community. Everybody has an equal voice, and we do a really good job of communicating well and listening to each other, and that's the real power of this committee. We do have about 50 people on the roster. Generally, we have about 35 people in attendance. And this session, this fall, we have been really glad to include some members from the CFMP committee from last year, about 14, who have joined CAC and participated in our work this year focusing on these potential issues. The charge that we have followed in our work has come from the CFMP committee team, and it is to steward innovative, future-ready learning solutions for all Lee Summit R7 schools while maintaining character and creating parity within existing assets to provide students and staff with safe, secure, and equitable learning environments that lead to student success. And this charge is something that guided us through all of the decisions and all of the things that we learned as we moved towards making a recommendation. We learned that there were a lot of needs around the district, and in considering them, we paid attention to priority areas in all of the decisions, and they're ADA accessibility, safety and security, future-ready learning, infrastructure upgrades, and programmatic improvements, trying to make sure that the projects would reflect handling those issues in each case. The CFMP team also left us with a charge that we should move towards completing fewer projects with more scope. And what that means is if we're going to do something, we're going to do it right. We have limited funds, limited resources, more need than we have revenue. So their charge to us was to not cut corners, to try and get lots of things done, but to do everything that we decided to do well, so that when we were finished, those projects would be completed in the way that they were intended and that would reflect the need. The committee met 7 times. We began in May last year and got sort of an initial introduction to this, and then came back in August, and in each of these meetings focused on specific issues as it related to what would contribute to making good choices. We had experts that gave us lots of detailed information. We had homework that we focused on, and we worked our way through it, keeping a lot of things in mind as we were moving towards making a recommendation and having to make choices from the things that we had. We also updated the board on the meeting on October 24th to kind of let you know what our progress was. So just to review our process, we went through several different focuses. We started out by reviewing the CFMP charge and their priorities. We had the opportunity to have a broad list of knowing what the facility needs were across the district that had been determined during the CFMP study. We learned about what equipment needs had emerged over the last 5 years. We also learned about current enrollment numbers. We learned about future building capacity and enrollment projections as we were considering where the need was and what was going to be predicted to happen in the district. We learned a lot about available funds and where they would come from, what our options were for revenue sources. And one thing that was very helpful is we had most of our meetings were held in the schools that we were talking about. We were able to have tours of all of the elementary schools that were on the list and see firsthand the needs that are really existing in some of our older buildings, and really learning how important it is that we address that. We also were able to do a survey that was done, and it was done for the community of Lee Summit, both by telephone and by online participation. And that helped us to really understand where the community stood in terms of what their priorities were, what their concerns were, and it helped guide us in knowing what our priorities and our concerns would be, that we had the community feedback that we needed. That helped us to work towards developing a project list. And we went through several different cycles of thinking about these things. What we knew ahead of time is that there was more need than there is revenue. And we had to weed some things down. And that was difficult for all of us, I think, knowing that we'd have to say no to some things, or at least in our recommendation. But in the end, after we had weighed all of these different data and being able to see things firsthand and listening to the community, we were able to come up with a recommended proposed bond amount and a project list, which we will go into in detail in a minute. In terms of the need, we identified 3 areas that we needed to address, and we knew approximately what our funding amount would be, and we also knew we were presented with what the need was and what the costs associated with the need were. The 3 areas were major renovations and improvements, maintenance and repair, and equipment, and you can see the dollar amounts. And to explain this slide, the amounts that are in black were the initial amounts that were representative of what the need was if we could do everything that they had identified and weeded down into the initial list. In order to be able to manage this, administration and the school administrative side people, I'm not saying that very well, they were able to weed that list down a little bit, and that's what the red numbers are. In the end, that was what was represented to the CAC as a list of cost that we would be able to address in going through these 3 areas of need. However, as you're going to see, it still exceeded the revenue that we had. When we looked at funding, we learned a lot about how the bonding capacity, related to the assessed value of the district. We talked about thinking about it long term in terms of what we might spend in this cycle, how it would affect upcoming cycles in a 5-year increment. And we wanted to be really mindful about not overspending. In the end, we came to the conclusion that a $225 million bond would be the right amount to ask for. Even though assessed value would allow more, it would limit us in future cycles, and we didn't want to do that. We were advised that in the case of getting a $225 million bond approved, that we would also be able to gain $22.5 million in premium bonds and hopefully at least $4 million in interest on that money. In addition to that, we were considering that $60 million would be generated out of the general capital revenue fund to add to some of the capital improvements. And that would come in $12 million increments each year for 5 years. Together, all of those things add up to $311.5 million, and that was the total dollar amount that the CAC had to try and stay within when approving projects. Stephen will take you to the next part.
Good evening, and first off, I'd like to really thank the board for allowing us to be here this evening, and also for thanking you for being in attendance at a lot of our sessions that we spent as a CAC. A lot of the information that you're going to see, you've probably seen before, but we want to make sure that you understand, and if you have any questions at the end, we'll be glad to take those. So what projects were considered? This is a list of the different projects that were given to the CAC to determine, where the money may go if it were approved. Again, Elaine said it several times that we had more want than we did revenue. So the different renovations and improvements, the ones with the asterisks which is the GWE and then the aerospace hangar, those were already considered, and decisions were already made that they would be part of the bonding. But as you can see, the dollar amounts that are listed with the several different recommendations, and we did have a list that was whittled down, so we were able to really jump in and go straight to work on these renovations and improvements. Here, this slide is breaking down the actual categories. So we've got maintenance and repairs, a total of $72 million. And it breaks it down by what is considered under each of those topics. So site 6.5, interior 5.5, so on and so forth. And again, these are bare bones that we're trying to consider here. The next category, equipment, total of $40 million was being considered. And, these are all things that are not part of a general fund that we wanted to get considered under the bond. The Summit technology, we had some changes to that, and this is what actually the district is considering, or the CAC is considering to be passed on to the board for consideration. Capital purchases, land for the possibility of expanding the district in the future. One of the things that was really, which really is always in the forefront of what we're looking at, is safety and security. Those are things that always have to be considered, and because as I said, the asterisks point out that these things were part of the plan from the very beginning. Furniture, $5 million for it, and then just an additional unexpected capital as a contingency, just in case costs were to increase, or you never know what might be affected by economic circumstances. Different equipment, we're looking at facilities, library, music equipment, nutritional services. Some of the tours that we took through some of the different schools, there were obvious improvements that were needed, especially in some of the cafeteria areas that we went through. Summit Tech, just regular technology, theater and performing arts, things that they may need. transportation, our white fleet, which we see around the city, and also business, individual techs and FACS, which was the bulk of that. Maintenance and repairs, these are things that over the years have been deferred in a lot of cases, but we wanted to make sure that we included the maintenance and repairs of $72 million. And as you can see, the different areas that those monies would be spent in. Wrong way. It's down, right? There we go. Pardon me. The process to select the recommended projects. As Elaine shared, we use several different processes, and each time we learn something different. Each person that participated had an opportunity to share with, first of all, their group, and then also had an opportunity to voice their opinion on various issues. We identified the greatest need, the oldest facilities, those that needed the most renovation, the greatest impact to the largest number of students, the parity. We want all of the facilities within our districts to have the same opportunities for learning, available funds, and then also the long-term future impact, the financial impact that each of those would have. This is a list that we really combined at our last meeting, and it's a prioritization list. And as you can see, we've got HGE, Hazel Grove, and Westview Elementary, the combining of those schools as number one, and that's because both of those projects tied for the number of votes, the most number of votes by the committee. And so as you look down this slide, PLMS was third, and so on and so forth. So, and then over on the second column, the third column rather, equipment deferred, 32 million. Those were those along with the high school baseball and softball fields was tied as well. The high school soccer and band fields came in 8th, and then we've got Lee Summit Elementary, and that was the question was whether or not there should be money set aside for the renovation of Lee Summit Elementary in the event that the two schools were combined. And then we've got the MIC there with some monies for it. So this is kind of how the group finalized everything on our last meeting.
So after that meeting, we were able to come up with what the CAC is going to recommend for the 2025 bond projects. We were not able to come to the $311.5 million because as we considered the projects that ranked the highest, we kind of got to the point where we had extra money left over. There wasn't enough to do some of the bigger projects, so we've left a little bit of money on the table there because of that. So just to go over the list quickly to begin with, what we are recommending is Greenwood Elementary as a new build on a new site, Hazel Grove Elementary as a new build on a new site, Westview Elementary as a renovation and an addition that will welcome Lee Summit Elementary students and families with the Westview families in a consolidation, Pleasantly Middle School adding a 6th grade pod addition and site work, Miller Park completing that campus with a guided entry and site work, the high school baseball and softball fields being improved at Lee Summit North and Lee Summit West so that they have parity with the Lee Summit High School fields that we built in 2020 bond. High school soccer and band fields for all 3 high schools. and an aerospace hangar at the Lee Summit Airport that will support Summit Technology and their new curriculum. Other capital expenditures that will be part of this will include safety and security, maintenance and repair, instructional equipment, operational equipment, land, and classroom furniture. So we believe that there are strengths in these recommendations. It was difficult to process the things that we wouldn't be able to do and some of the different ways things were going to happen. But we do believe that these have a lot of strength in these recommendations. And that being 2 new elementary schools on larger sites for Greenwood and Hazel Grove. And that will provide them with future-ready schools that are equivalent to Mason, that kind of a setup, as well as site spaces that are larger and provide better access for ADA, accessibility, as well as safety in some cases. The fully renovated elementary with additional space and a new site layout at Westview for the Lee Summit Elementary and Westview families will make it possible to take that site and expand that school to create another elementary school that is future ready, set up like Mason. And it has a bigger property site that'll make it accessible for being able to build that renovation and to give those students space and a fully remodeled school that will solve all those problems. A dedicated middle school that has 6th grade level pods available to it and a new site layout at Pleasantly Middle School that gives it parity with the other middle schools so that those 6th graders will have their own space and a separate area like the other schools have. Accessibility and safety improvements for a program with some of our district's highest need students at Miller Park. Having this administration building in the middle of their campus will be a safety thing and an accessibility thing that will be easier for families and students, and that'll be good for them. Parity between the 3 high schools on their baseball and softball facilities. Soccer and band facilities that allow participation in all weather conditions at all 3 high schools. Industry standard educational environment for students preparing for the aerospace industry, an exciting new program and an ability to partner with the City of Lee Summit at the Lee Summit Airport as a great new addition for the Summit Technology Academy school. And funding to support the maintenance and repair of all district facilities district-wide. As Stephen mentioned, we have deferred maintenance. We had a really large bond that went through in 2020, but we were not able to do we had to put some things on hold. And it's time to go into every building and make sure that everything's running well and that we've supported those buildings to keep them operating in the way that we need them to. And that will be a district-wide thing. Funding for instructional and operational equipment, district-wide. Land for new elementary buildings and future school sites that may need to be built, especially with the PRI land opportunities that are going to be coming in the future. Safety and security improvements district-wide, and classroom furniture on the district rotation that has been held over time in several of our schools. It was hard for us to say no to things. I think we all really wish that it was possible to do everything, but as we know in life it isn't, and we did the best we could with the committee to prioritize. If funds become available, we hope that projects will be selected to be completed in the list of the things that we weren't able to choose. And that includes Pleasantly Elementary, Lee Summit North High School, Lee Summit Elementary, in designing a new use for that building, the MIC, and the deferred equipment. And any projects that are not completed on this list, the CAC recommends that they be moved to the list of projects to be considered for the 2030 bond campaign. In talking about how to fund the projects, we were very mindful of wanting to be good custodians in our recommendation. And I'm going to read this to you because I want to get it exactly right. Based on the advice of the district's financial underwriters and the recommendation of the administration, the Citizens Advisory Committee is recommending a request to issue $225 million in general obligation bonds to pay for the recommended projects. Through the district's budgeting process, we recommend allocating $60 million over the next 5 years towards capital improvements. We know that there will be a lot of impact to future facility needs based upon the spending that we do in 2025. And this recommendation accounts for and acknowledges the future needs of the district with an anticipated $190 million designated for a bond campaign that could happen in 2030 and $190 million for a bond campaign that could happen in 2035. We know that what we do now will impact what projects we will be able to complete in future years, and we want to be mindful of taking care of the students that will be coming long after the decision we make today. I mentioned that we were able to have information that we got from a survey that was done in the community. And the way that worked is, and we took most of our data from the phone survey because it was more accurate based upon the information that we got. The way it was done is that they were on the phone, they made initial introductions, and then they asked an initial question at the beginning about whether or not the survey taker would be supportive of a bond in April. And just without knowing any specific information about it, the results were that we had a 61% number of people in favor of that. Then they went on during the survey and explained more about it, what it could be used for, that it would be a no tax rate increase bond, gave them more information, and then they asked them the question again. And when they did, under reconsideration, we found that survey takers in the community supported the bond at 82%. And that is more than enough to make it pass. That helped the CAC feel that the community would be ready under these circumstances to be supportive of a bond if it was placed on the ballot in April. As such, the Citizens Advisory Committee recommends the Board of Education ask the taxpayers to approve a no tax rate increase bond issuance of $225 million for the purpose of completing the following projects: Greenwood Elementary new build, Hazel Grove Elementary new build, Westview Elementary renovation and addition, which will include the Lee Summit Elementary and the Westview Elementary families, Pleasantly Middle School, a 6th grade addition and site work, Miller Park, a guided entry and site work, high school baseball and softball fields at Lee Summit North and Lee Summit West, high school soccer and band fields at all 3 high schools, and a hangar at Summit Technology. And the other capital expenditures that will be included will be safety and security, maintenance and repair, instructional equipment, operational equipment, land for future school sites, and classroom furniture. That's the presentation about the bond part of our recommendation. Do you have any questions?
Vice President Eslick.
I'm surprised I'm the only one who pushed my button. Okay, so I do have a couple of questions. First of all, I just want to thank you both for being here and for the time that you spent, conducting the work with the CAC. I know it is a tremendous amount of time that you all spend doing what you do, and I really appreciate that. I'm not on the CAC, and I never have been, so I just know from listening to some of my colleagues about how much work is included in that. So thank you very much. And I know we have some other CAC members here, so thank you as well for being here. I appreciate your time. So I'm just gonna jump right in because I know there's, the hot topic, of course, and why so many people are here in attendance has to do with LSE and Westview. So because I wasn't in the room, I'm just curious how how that conversation went with the various tables, and if there were any other conversations or suggestions around courses of action that could have addressed some of the enrollment concerns with LSE and Westview, or if this was just the only thing that was discussed was consolidation or nothing.
I'll jump in. We were not actually charged with trying to make a decision about the, whether there should be consolidation or whether the school should be renovated or anything along those lines. What we were asked is that as a committee, we were asked to determine, for the betterment of all students involved, what would be the best outcome for both of those schools. And so we literally took the facts that we were given, along with demographics and things of those natures, and just made a vote, an informed vote on what the recommendation might be.
Okay. Thank you. What sort of information were you given in order to make that decision?
We were given separate expenses for what it would cost to just renovate each school. We were given information about what it would cost to combine the schools and do an addition at Westview and combine those two student bodies together. We were looked at projections for enrollment and where they stood now, and both of those schools have the lowest number of enrollment of any of the elementary schools in the district at this time. We looked at projections for the demographics of Lee Summit in terms of over 10 years, what would happen in terms of population growth and enrollment growth. And what it showed us is that most of the growth was going to happen in the southwest and southeast parts of Lee Summit, not in the downtown area. We looked at the classroom sizes that both of those schools had, how many numbers of rooms they had per grade, as well as how many students they had. We looked at, one of the things that stands out to me is when you look at the difference between the number of children at Lee Summit Elementary that are in kindergarten this year versus the number of children that are in fifth grade, we can tell that is a declining number, and if you can predict that will be the consistent number going forward, then the concern would be that they would either they would have very small class sizes in two different classes per grade, or they'd combine them and then they'd be overcrowded. The information we were given indicated that there wasn't anything that showed us that there would be an increased population growth. The only thing that could happen would be to bus other kids from other school boundaries into that area to try and add to the population at Lee Summit Elementary. We were also told, just kind of given information about how nice a new school could be, how it could be future ready, that they could have flexible learning spaces and things that neither school would very easily be accommodated to just by doing a renovation. And that potentially on the Westview site, a really, up-to-date, top of the future-ready learning scale type of school could be built there that could benefit both populations of students. We talked a lot about challenges that could happen because we do have families in the Lee Summit Elementary area that might have transportation issues, before and after school issues. And we were concerned as a committee that if this happens, the district is mindful of that and creates support systems for that. And hoping that the two school families, as it were, will have plenty of time over the next couple of years to get to know each other and to work together to create a new entity that will become a bigger neighborhood for both of them.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned the demographic study and the declining enrollment being a big piece of this conversation. So was there any dialogue around just a holistic district look at the enrollment for K-5 at all of our schools, or was the focus just specifically on these two only in your dialogue?
Yeah, we didn't look at anything district-wide, so it really surrounded these particular schools.
So just shifting to Hazel Grove and Greenwood. So first of all, I completely acknowledge, and I've had multiple conversations with our fellow board members here, that Greenwood and Hazel Grove are not ADA compliant in any way. They both have very high need, and I'm generally pretty supportive of making sure that we're able to provide more modern facilities. But since we're talking about the demographics, specifically Hazel Grove, when we look at the most recent demographics projections, Hazel Grove is projected to decline in its enrollment area. Recognizing that we do have some potential construction that could happen up in that north area, even the demographic study doesn't account for that and continues to show a decline in that enrollment area. So when you were talking about Hazel Grove and a new building, was that something that was part of the dialogue and making sure we're right-sizing that facility, or what was the dialogue around Hazel Grove, I guess would be my question.
We didn't have a great deal of dialogue around it. One of the things that we did learn was that Hazel Grove is a building that is still owned by Unity Village, and if we leave that building, they will take that back. To me, that kind of made sense that maybe if we're going to put millions of dollars into renovation, we might want to have a building that we own and have control over long term. That's just me.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really have a lot of conversation about demographics there, although I do believe we did talk a little bit about that there might be a possibility of some growth because of the Discovery Park development and some of the things that are happening in that area.
Okay. Sorry, I don't mean to interject, but I did write down on my notes that day when it was presented, they did talk about allowing for PRI, SLR expansion growth.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then shifting to Greenwood, that's another one that one of the main intents of that build is to be able to bring Greenwood kids that currently go to Woodland, and I know you know this, just speaking for the community, the 150 students that currently go to Woodland to be able to actually have them attend their school that's in their community. So that building would almost immediately be at the 85% capacity once built, but then that leaves Woodland roughly at 40% of its building capacity. And according to our projection studies, that's really not projected to boom in the next 10 years. So when it came to Greenwood, was any of that part of the conversation with the projections of what Woodland would look like? And because my concern would then be kind of the same thing we're talking about with Lee Summit Elementary and Westview, in that a building that reaches that low level of capacity then has some of the same struggles that we're talking about with Lee Summit Elementary, where you have potentially high class sizes because you have less resource, because you're pulling students away. So it's kind of the same, the same concern. So was any of that kind of talked about when Greenwood was being discussed?
We did not discuss a lot about Woodland. We did talk about the impact of opening a new school there in Greenwood, but not the effects of Woodland. The biggest, what I recall regarding discussions, was that we initially were looking at renovations and enhancements of Greenwood, and to be good stewards of the tax money in Lee Summit, an opportunity was presented to us to build a brand new school that was a lot more accessible, was not off of the highway, and would just be a better opportunity for those folks that live there in the Greenwood area.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree, because I've been to Greenwood, and it makes me nervous if my kids were going to that school. It's very close to the highway. And again, the ADA piece of that and the way that building's kind of chopped up, it's difficult to do some sort of renovation. So I completely agree. Did you have something you want to say?
Yeah. if you don't mind if I
Yeah,
kind of
go
chime in.
ahead.
So I took notes during all these conversations. So we did talk about the 150 students going from 300 to 450 for Greenwood, but we did not have discussions about Woodland and the impact on Woodland. The focus was on Greenwood.
Okay. And then a little bit of a shift. Thank you for that, by the way. Soccer and band facilities. It was mentioned that it would be kind of an all-weather space. So is the intent for these to be covered buildings at each of these high schools? Or what was that about, I guess, is my curiosity.
Currently, and I can't speak for each of the high schools, but I do know that currently, the soccer fields, say for instance, at least some at high school, they're grass. And the band uses that surface at times, and obviously the soccer. And if you have inclement weather, then you're going to deal with wet sides.
So it's turf, is that?
It's turf.
Okay,
Yeah.
understood. I didn't know if it was going to be additional square footage that would be heated and cooled and roofing and all of those things to add to maintenance costs. So that was kind of why I was asking. I don't really have any more questions, but I do just want to make kind of a statement to my fellow board members. I don't know if we're going to talk as a group, like kind of after they're done, but given some of the questions that I was asking with regard to how we're considering like the domino effect of some of these moves, I am very interested to have further dialogue with the rest of the board about what it looks like to try and piece this together. I have concerns about the LSE Westview combination when it's being looked at in somewhat of a vacuum, because we have enrollment decline across the district in certain pockets, and if we only address the declining enrollment in pieces, my concern is that if you address this one piece now, and then down the road, we, in a year or two want to address Sunset Valley, just throwing it out there, but not just a name. I just threw a name out there. Nobody get upset or anything. I'm just using it as an example. And then we start trying to move kids and boundaries for that. And then what if it impacts the same kids we just moved again? So my concern is I think that we need to pull up from this conversation a little bit and try to take a more strategic approach to how we're looking at these elementary school concerns and the decline and the changing enrollment to make sure that if we're going to touch this problem, that we're going to touch it once in a long period of time versus continuing to have the conversation and potentially having more domino impacts across the district. So that's my statement, my concern about some of this, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the work that the CAC has done. I know a lot of that was at the direction of the district and the administration, so this is just a conversation I think we as a board need to have and not just focus on LSE Westview in that conversation. So that's all I want to say. Thank you for entertaining all my questions and me dominating this. So,
Thank you.
We also would like to present an additional charge that we were presented with involving Prop C and the recommendation moving
I'm
forward.
sorry, pardon.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Pardon, no, don't mean to interrupt. A board member just buzzed in with a question.
Oh, yeah.
So if it's in regards to the bond project, I figure we better catch that before you move on to
Sure,
Prop C.
Sure.
Board Member Miller?
Thank you, President Foley. I want to echo what Vice President Eslick said and just say we appreciate you. You guys do so much great work, and I had the privilege of being on the committee last year, and I loved it. So thank you for all the work that you and the CAC have done. I just have one question. Was there anything shared with the CAC on why Lee Summit Elementary should stay open from district leadership? Was there anything shared like, hey, maybe we can keep it open and this might be what it looks like?
We weren't charged with making a decision on whether it remained open or closed.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Oh, I have one more. I'm sorry. How, when you were talking about, Stephen, I think when you started talking about the typical study period, what is the typical study period for the CAC? if they're taking on a project or considering something? What's the typical study period?
There really is no set study period. There have been issues that we've been presented with before that, you know, depending on the urgency of the issue, it could last several meetings. You know, and if we are asked to make a decision like we were with this, in this instance, you know, as long as we had all the facts and the information that was needed, we can do a really good job of coming to a consensus and making a recommendation. So there are no built-ins.
Thank you so much.
Well, this part of the presentation will be pretty quick. Wanted to share with you all the Prop C recommendation from the CAC and talk a little bit about the process that we went through with Prop C question. First of all, we really spent a lot of time educating the group on what Prop C is and the impact that it had on the district's revenue. Prop C is not something that is readily known by a lot of the community unless you really dig in and try to understand it. We examined whether or not the taxpayers would support a full waiver. We discussed if we would ask the taxpayers for a full waiver, and then we took a vote on that. And overall, there were 90% of the group that said yes, that we should present the full, ask the taxpayers for a full waiver. We discussed what would be the best use for the additional revenue, and one of the slides that I will move forward to shows that the community is very supportive of staff salaries and investing in our staff, and so as you can see here, that was the top priority of each of the areas that we looked at. We also debated when would be the best time to ask voters for a full waiver. And we were initially divided and had to spend a little extra time talking through that. And 20 members were in favor of April, and then 19 members were in favor of the following August. This is a list of the priorities for district improvements. And as I was stating, if you look at the percentages from the very high priority, first of all, most if not all of these things would be addressed with the bond issue. So a lot of the making sure all the buildings are ADA accessible, that would be taken care of if the bond passes. All the safety upgrades, things of those nature. So really what it came down to was the second question of paying staff competitive salaries and benefits when compared to other area districts. And that would be the focus if we were to proceed with Prop C and it were to pass. Very similar to what Elaine shared with you guys earlier, there was also a question survey that was completed on the phone and also online. And in the same process that Elaine explained, we just basically asked the caller, the participant, if they would be in favor of Prop C rollback consideration. And upon the initial question, 49% of those folks that were surveyed said that they would be in favor. 8.2% were strongly in favor. After they circled back and explained the process and educated the survey taker, you can see here that 59%, that it went from 49% to 59% in favor. And then also pay particular attention to the strongly favor. It went from 8.2% to 18.5% in favor, that strongly favored it. So an example of what, or example of what came out of our discussions is that the Citizens Advisory Committee recommends the Board of Education ask the taxpayers for a full Prop C waiver to improve staff salary and benefits. This question is recommended to be placed on the April ballot. Any questions about Prop C?
I'll go ahead and start off with one. All right, so I know this was a pretty split decision. We even had to do a revote on this one. And there was a really good discussion as far as some of the reasons why people had hesitation about putting something on the April ballot. Would you guys be willing to share kind of some of the comments or feedback that you've heard of why people were resistant to put this on the ballot for April?
Man, where do we start? Go ahead.
It was difficult to try and think through this a little bit. I think some of the concerns about putting Prop C on the ballot in April along with the bond was that it's hard to explain. The bond issue would be a no tax increase bond, and that's very clear. The Prop C, while it would not raise taxes, it would ultimately cause them to go up because we would not be giving back. I can't even explain it. It's so complicated, but it would cause property taxes to be higher, not the rate, but actually what people would pay. I hope I'm saying that correctly, Dr. Buck. Maybe explain it
The
better
rate
to
would
me.
actually go up. Prop C, we are one of 8 districts out of 518. We roll back our levy every year. So it would be a tax rate increase.
It's a tax increase. I think that CAC members expressed concern that the Prop C might impact the success of the bond question if they were on the ballot at the same time. But then there's another facet to consider. If we put it on the ballot in August, it would actually cost the district more money because every time you put an issue up for election, we have to pay the election board for that. If we can put multiple questions on the same election, it saves the school district money in that regard. I think what we learned, one of the things that we learned about from the survey is that, and even from our experience over time, is that the community tends to be very supportive of no tax increase bond issues, and we've had very good luck over the last many years in getting those to be supported. The Prop C will require a lot of explanation, and as you can tell, I can't even really explain it now. I conceptually understand it, but to get it accurately described is hard, and it could be confusing. I think there was concern that it might create voter disenchantment with passing the bond if we had both of them at the same time. Do you have anything?
Thank you. Board Member Miller?
Okay, are there any other ways to give salary increases other than approving a full Prop C waiver? I'm not sure if that's.
Yes, we spend about 80 to 85% of our budget on salary and benefits now. Anytime we have increases either from the state or via our tax rates, there is an opportunity to give a raise. So this is part of that. So last year we were able to give, counting step and raise, about $8 million. This year it looks current recommendation is about $6 million. So this would be above and beyond, say, $6 million if it was happening right now. And then Team Lee Summit makes a recommendation on how to distribute those funds.
All right, does anyone else have any questions for Stephen and Elaine? Board Member Myers?
Well, my cold went away a couple days ago, but now that I'm in a meeting, it's like draining again, so I'll try not to cough. First of all, I would like to thank you and everyone on your committee for all the work. The 2 meetings that I sat in on, I could tell there was a lot of time, energy, and effort had gone into getting you to the point of me sitting there listening and learning. So I thank you for that. That's a big investment in our community, and that's time away from your family. With regards to the Prop C, the vote was so incredibly close from your committee, and we would like to be, or I would like to be respectful of the work of the committee. However, I think I'm more in the camp of not running it at the same time as the bond, and I certainly wouldn't want to step on the toes of those that put the time and the energy in. I assume that was a large part of the conversation, because it seemed like this particular vote maybe took a while to get to the point of having a resolution. If you could maybe reinforce that or add to that, or is there anything I'm missing there, or?
I wouldn't say that there's anything you're missing. One of the things that sticks out in my mind is that this was one of the last agenda items that we had for that particular meeting, which was here recent. And I do know that there were several members of the CAC that had to leave. Now, how those votes would have tallied, it's only, we have no way of knowing. But as close as the vote was, it could have very easily been some for and some against. So, we, in the true fashion of reaching a consensus, we took those folks that were there, and that's the result that we came up with.
Dr. Buck?
I would, as someone watching that, I would agree that it was a strong consensus to do one. It was a strong consensus to do it for salaries. It was a very minor margin of error, if you will, to say when. So I think the CAC committee is showing you that while they want to do it, they're probably open to whichever one you want to have as far as when. They mentioned about the cost of elections. So the last election we ran in April, well, it cost us $82,000. In 2023, it's $68,000. 22 is $79,000. 21 is $78,000, and 20 is $77,000. And what happens is it depends on who's all putting things on the ballot, and then election boards, we have 3 of them we report to, estimate what the cost will be, and they will true up with us afterwards, and divvy out the cost of printing those ballots to all the entities that have election. So August and February are other 2 months you could do this, and they tend not to have things on the ballot. So if you do those, we have not done that. So we reached out to Independence and Blue Springs, who in the last 2 years have done that. So Independence did it in August, I think, of 23, and it cost them $145,950. Blue Springs did one in August as well, and their cost was $95,983. And then they had one this past February for their bond issue at $162,823. And that would be in addition to what they had to pay for the April election. So that is an additional cost. I just want everyone to go in there eyes wide open. That is an additional cost if we choose to do it in August.
Board Member Miller?
Well, and Dr. Buck, I think, kind of answered my question, because my question was, how much will it cost if we do it in August? So.
The estimate would be over $100,000. We're a little bit bigger than both those districts, so it could be as over $150,000. Depends on how many ballots they decide to print, because they think of how many people are going to come to the polls.
And that's a cost. That's a cost to taxpayers?
That's our budget. Yeah, the taxpayers' budget. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, would it be appropriate at this time to maybe have Dr. Shelton come up so we can address some additional questions from the board before we move on to the next agenda item that's pertinent to Prop C or the bond?
Yes, ma'am.
And I apologize, since we're calling you up and we didn't necessarily submit questions ahead of time, if there's anything that you are unprepared for, you are welcome to circle back to give us those answers. But I thought this would be a great opportunity, while we have open dialogue, to have the board as a whole come together to ask questions and have a discussion with you with the more intricate knowledge and details of what was behind this decision.
Yes.
All right. With that, I'll open it up to whoever has questions. All right. I guess I will start.
Yes.
In the process of these CAC recommendations, I took a lot of notes from every meeting, and so the discussion with LSE and Westview, that didn't come into play until the November 6th meeting. So can you talk a little bit about how we got to that point, why this wasn't discussed in the prior meetings, why the recommendation changed kind of midstream of
Right.
the work of the CAC?
as was described earlier, it all dealt around the enrollment. And as the enrollment data came in at the end of September, and as I've mentioned in the past, the last Wednesday in September is count day. And we get that data and we scrub it for about a week or so and then put it into our spreadsheet that we use for building capacity, program capacity. And then so by the time we really have a full grasp of that, and then look at not only this year, but then put it into the longitudinal data that we have, from years past, and then the projections. About mid-October or so, it became clear, at least to me, that moving forward with a plan at Lee Summit Elementary and at Westview, both with declining enrollments, both with small enrollments, low enrollments, as well as declining enrollments, something different needed to be brought forward. And so my idea is that, and my recommendation is to combine those two attendance areas because of all the reasons that we've discussed in the past. And to, instead of considering a $39.5 million spend, which would be $18 million at Lee Summit Elementary and $21.5 at Westview, to combine the two communities into a building that can easily house them, and then fully renovated, and it does increase the cost of the Westview site from a $21.5 to a $28.7 million project.
Now, one of the concerns brought about is that this is such a quick decision, and people have asked, have you considered other opportunities? What other options were on the table?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like?
We looked at surrounding attendance areas. Obviously, Westview was one of the attendance areas that neighbors Lee Summit Elementary. You also have Meadow Lane, Prairie View, Sunset Valley, I think touches a corner of it as well. And there are all those attendance areas, those buildings aren't at capacity or running toward becoming full, if you will, or getting to a level of capacity where we would need to pull students out of. And so it didn't make sense, to me anyway, to move a boundary line and pull students, say, out of Prairie View or another surrounding site. The most logical move, if we were going to move a boundary, would be to the north at the Meadow Lane Elementary attendance area. That move, though, would pull too many students into the building. That move north has about 130 students, I believe, at my last time I checked. I think 130 or 180. And so that would overpopulate the building.
Thank you.
So if I can add to that, so
Yes.
that, I think it's 132 students is
Oh,
what your
yeah.
data showed me. It's a very small little area at the very southern part of Meadow Lane Elementary, but just above Lee Summit Elementary. It's also 85% free and reduced lunch. So not only would the building have a hard time taking it, it would significantly increase the free and reduced lunch percent of this building, whereas this merger keeps them basically in line with Meadow Lane Elementary. Another logical thing, but I'm not saying we should do this, so to quote Heather, don't get mad, is you could take students from Cedar Creek to go to Westview and then take Westview to go to Lee Summit Elementary, but you're moving about the same number of kids to do that. That's another logical answer, but I don't think it actually solves an issue.
Thank you for that reminder. Yeah, we did look at that scenario as well, moving students from Cedar Creek into Westview, then Westview to LC.
Board Member Johnson?
Thank you. Okay, so one of my questions is, sorry, I'm just be blunt. What is wrong with just having two smaller elementary schools?
There's nothing wrong with having two small elementary schools. We can better serve our students when a building reaches a certain enrollment, because you can better, more fully staff that building, and with more staff come more services. And so you can have an all-day counselor every day. You can have an all-day reading specialist every day, all-day math specialist every day, specials. All those sorts of things can be done. Now, once a building starts to decline in enrollment, at some point you're pulling staff out. And when you're pulling staff out, then you're pulling resources out. And so that's the biggest issue.
Okay, and so are there standards that we have to meet per like the state or something that says we have to pull staff out? How come the staff can't stay and assist in the building in other ways? And I'm not exactly sure how they would, but what is wrong with, I hate to say wrong, that's not what I mean,
understand.
but
I know what you're saying. I know.
the
It's-
idea behind leave the staff there, because are either of the schools short-staffed right now? Can you answer me that?
We are managing staff so that there is coverage there. I wouldn't say they're short staff as we speak, but when the counselor's gone, we have the behavioral specialist there.
Right.
So we're able to move staff in and out and provide support.
Okay.
I want to get back to your
Okay.
one question. Are we required to pull staff out? No. We do have staffing standards that we follow throughout the district, from a standard and a parity standpoint. You reach a certain number of students. They do give us guidelines that says when a building reaches this level, staffing is typically 0.5 or full-time or 2 FTE or 3 FTE. They do provide those guidelines. Yes, there are guidelines. And we're required to follow them when enrollment grows, and then you add staff. But if enrollment were to decline, you're not required to pull staff out.
Okay. I'm just thinking through if it's working, if it's not broke, do we have to fix it?
Once again, this is our district standard, as far as staffing and how we staff buildings.
Okay.
So we have a standard and we staff on those standards.
Dr. Johnson, I'll add that, if you think about MTSS, let's just say all of us here have different needs, right? Let's say I need help in X, Jennifer needs help in Y, Heather needs more of the same, and you two need enrichment. There's 4 different groupings that need to happen there. During MTSS, when we have a 4-section grade level in a building, plus the other people we can bring in because we have a full-time reading and math specialist, we can flexible group during that MTSS time to meet their needs. So our buildings we see high growth in through the MTSS, a lot of times they're fully staffed buildings because they have the ability to have many different groups to meet needs. And when you have just 1 or 2, it's much harder to have as many groups. So if you have a disparate group needs in a population, it's harder to meet that. There is a cost piece. That's not why I think the recommendation Dr. Shelton's making, it's more costly per kid by a decent amount. So if we look at how much it costs to educate at Meadow Lane, which this building would be about the size of Meadow Lane and be very similar, and free and reduced lunch and very similar, and actually be less diverse than Meadow Lane. Meadow Lane's about $1,900 cheaper to educate a kid than these buildings per kid. So there is also an economy of size. St. Louis Public just released recently, they had an outside group do a study about viability of buildings. And they said once you get below 200, a building's not really viable. Springfield just did this where they combined 2. North Kansas City's doing it next year. They have a building of 180-something and 240-something. That'll be 1 elementary next year. And that's about the same numbers we're projecting would be in 2028 by Rick Bramers, who you're going to hear from here in a little bit, his projections. So it is something districts have to consider from time to time.
Okay, sorry, 2 more questions. So speaking of studies, we hear that I've been told, and it's been shared with me, that there are studies that show closing schools don't necessarily positively impact the kids. Is there anything that shows that consolidating, or like you said, you just said economically I forgot what you just said, but
Not a problem.
what can show, is there something to, so to speak, counteract? No, combining these schools when they get below 200 actually is providing more for the student.
So when we look at our last moves we've had a lot of boundary moves with elementaries that have sometimes moved as many as 200 kids. We have not seen an academic dip. So it's big groups of families moving from one building to another, and we've not seen an academic dip at all.
I don't know if it's just semantics, but I think moving kids and closing a building is different, but I think.
Well, I've had my kid move to a building. They're this building one year, they're the next building the next year because of boundary move. To the kid, it's you're now in a new family and a new community and new building.
Okay. And then my last question. So when we talk about demography, and maybe that's going to come up, was the demographer consulted specifically about this LSE and their, maybe not being future growth in the downtown area? I asked that because it was presented to us by a community member in LSE that there is expected growth. I'm grappling with the contradictory information.
Thank you. Yes, once again referred to the last demographic document. I did reach out to Mr. Bramer just to confirm, especially on the heels of what you just shared, because that information was shared with me as well. I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm missing it too. And so it is still our belief that the enrollment has been declining, and it is projected and will continue to decline in enrollment. Did that answer your question? It looks like maybe I didn't answer your question. I want to make sure I did.
No, it answered my question. I'm just wondering, demographers, they do similar things. They share, they gather the information and they come up with this. It just seems so very different. But I don't know where the information about the growth came from. I don't know the source of that.
I have not seen, someone has told me that the area is projected to growth. I haven't seen a study.
Okay.
Nor been provided with a study.
Okay, thank you.
So I think the biggest growth or biggest development residential has been to Elevate, right? Those apartments. And yeah, we've declined even after they've been full. So that's I think we all were hoping that would bring kids, me included. I think Dr. Shelton did ask Rick Bramer, and you guys can ask him later if you want, is this normal when you see revitalized downtown? Because downtown's a very thriving space. And by the way, Westview families consider themselves a downtown community too, because there's people who live across the street from businesses as well, who go to Westview. It's just the building's not across the street, right? But there are people. And Rick says this is what he sees nationwide. When you have a revitalized downtown, student enrollment goes down. So I'd encourage you to ask that at the next agenda item when he's up here speaking.
Thank you.
Board Member Myers?
Dr. Shelton, I was just kind of wondering, as I was thinking about the possibility of merging two elementaries together and just in the potential planning for that, have we considered, in particular to our LSC families, but also to our Westview families, have we considered giving them an opportunity to see our future learning space and what it actually looks like at Mason, where they can actually physically kind of see some of the things. And I just asked this question because I think sometimes we don't know what we don't have, perhaps, until we go someplace else and go, wow, I can't believe I did this so long without this laptop or without this whatever. Have we considered anything like that to try to kind of, I don't know, just kind of give some ideas about some of the things that we are thinking of that, in essence, would be potentially a great benefit to those students?
So Elaine mentioned we toured buildings, and so a year ago during the CFMP process, not the CAC process, members of the CFMP team, which had members from Lee Summit Elementary and Westview, had a chance to visit Mason, and so some of those families. We had discussed just that, setting up some nights and times, and spoke with both building principals. They felt like waiting until we got a little bit further down the line, until it was on the list, and to actually be potentially on the bond. So I believe our plan is once, if the board agrees and places it on the 25 bond, either after that or after the election in April, provide that opportunity.
Okay. I think
And that's based on the recommendation of the principals.
that's fair to know. I just think that maybe some of that could be
And-
helpful in
and-
envisioning it. You know,
I would say, I'm very open. If someone wants to come out and visit Mason, definitely can set up a time and a night to do that without question.
We can revisit with principals. That was, several weeks ago that
Yeah.
Dr. Sheldon asked them that, so we can revisit and see if their thinking's changed, if we want to do it now instead of wait.
can I follow up with that with one thing? I do think that sometimes we've gotten a lot of feedback from families, and it does make a difference, and it does weigh on us in terms of considering things, because we're talking about our little learners, and we're talking about families, and I've been a part of this community a long time. But some of those spaces that they have in this new type of elementary school, for some of the kids that really struggle with the structure and this and that, whatever, there's so many alternative ways for them to complete their tasks and learn their lessons, and yet still be in an environment that it provides them with these other, other things that they can work on when they get, this done or that done or whatever. I was a slow person to come around to that, because I thought, whoa, what are we doing? But I am a believer. I have seen it, and I do think that if this is the avenue that we, agree to pursue, I really do believe that there can be some really, really positive things for kids to come from it. So that's all.
Board Member Miller?
Thank you. Okay, I have a couple of questions for you, Dr. Sheldon. Based on the information that the district had prior to recommending the merger, what were the projected enrollment numbers, and how do they compare to the actual numbers that influenced the decision?
So not having it in front of me, I can tell you this. Lee Summit Elementary was projected to be at 213 this year, and they're at 203. I believe Westview was projected to be at, I'm sorry, I don't want to, Westview is actually pretty close with that. I think within a student or two of where they're projected to be.
Thank you. My next one is, what services, if any, would LSE students lose with this merger?
It's more access to services. They're not going to lose services in this. It's just that you don't know when the crisis is going to come. And so if you have an all-day counselor or whatever, they may not be there on a Wednesday afternoon. So having access every day, all day, to all services doesn't depend on whether it's the right day at the right time. That's more. They're not going to lose services as much access to services on a consistent basis.
Okay, thank you. Are there current elementary schools, like in the district, that are sharing staff currently?
Yes.
And this is my last one. So if we have known about the declining, I like how you said it was the small enrollment and the declining enrollment. If we've known about this for a while, how is the decision made to alert the students, staff, families, community, just in this short period? How is that decision made if we knew long-term that this is kind of what's been coming down the pipe?
So, always hope that it would plateau. It's interesting, the thing we haven't talked about much in this is that Westview has declined, I'm gonna say 90 students over a 3-year period of time, 2-year period of time. It's been a drastic decline. Westview at 360 and LSE at 215, that doesn't work. That type of merger doesn't work. When you look at a number of Westview at 260 and Lee Summit at 200, that merger does work. And so 2 or 3 years ago, that isn't an option. If we're sitting here with Westview at, once again, 360 kids, we'd be possibly having a conversation about, okay, what do we do with Lee Summit Elementary? If they continue, if they go to 190, if they go to 185, because that's what we're talking about 2 or 3 years from now, which is kind of the numbers we're looking at in 2 or 3 years. And so it's the combination of both buildings having low enrollment and declining enrollment.
Thank you.
Vice President Eslick?
I just have one short question. What is our district criteria for the trigger point, for lack of a better word, to signal to the district that we need to be evaluating a school for some sort of action because of an enrollment decline?
I would tell you it's around that 200 number. Well, 200 number, and also combination of utilization of the building, because if you look at utilization of the building, as far as just square footage, Lee Summit Elementary, I think, is around 63% utilization. But 200 just is an enrollment number that has always been a trigger for a school district to say, and I'll say large school districts. If you're growing up, if you're obviously in a small community, you might have an elementary of 200 because that's all you have.
There's also a top end on that, so if we get above 90%, we start paying attention. We have one elementary currently above 90%, that's Mason Elementary, so we also have another spot where we start looking and start thinking about.
Yes.
But I think, it would be wise for us to make a formalized document and an annual review or biannual review of this, which we have not had in the past. So
Yeah.
that is something that I hope comes out of this conversation, is that we have and I know we're gonna have a conversation again tonight or later on with Rick, but then also December 19th about this topic. So I think we need to come up with a formalized document and process for a regular review of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 200, I would really disagree just with that number, simply because 85% capacity for Lee Summit Elementary is 272, but 85% capacity at Sunset Valley is 507. So 200 students at Sunset Valley is way more significant of a issue than 200 students at Lee Summit Elementary. So I would definitely encourage us to look at percentages versus
And as I said,
numbers.
as far as, you asked me where the enrollment number is.
Well, just a trigger point for.
It is a combination of enrollment and utilization. You're right. If, Prairie View Elementary is built for, I'm gonna say 1,500 students, so that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
So you're right. In regards to what you're doing with the building in that space, it is enrollment and utilization, a combination of those two.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we've heard a lot of concerns. If we move forward with this, we move the students out of LSE, what happens to the LSE building?
So our plan is to gather a group of stakeholders, large group of stakeholders, because we not only have a decision to make with Lee Summit Elementary, but also with Hazel Grove and Greenwood, and to convene a large group of stakeholders from our community who have a vested interest in the health and well-being of our school district, as well as uniquely those sites, and bring forward a recommendation for each of those sites to the school board.
So,
And I will add on, if you don't mind, Hazel Grove, there's a decision to make, do we keep it or not keep it too? In our MOU from way back when, it's the shortest MOU ever, but it basically says the school district will utilize it and have a public playground. So we could keep it, or we could let Hazel Grove have it back. So there's that committee needs to also make a recommendation. So we'll have an application process at some point, so any community member can join it. Dr. Shelton started writing down the list of what everybody comes and talks about. I know I've had everyone who has a concern, I reach out and I try to say, hey, if you want to have a meeting, usually the meetings go about their concerns, and then they want to talk about that. And it ends up being a lot of the meeting because everybody has ideas. So I probably have more to add to his list that people have brought up to me as well. But really, it doesn't need to be Dr. Shelton deciding that or me deciding that. That needs to be the community deciding that.
okay. So if a group of developers decide that they want to join the committee, and their recommendation is that they want to sell this so they can put in some lovely new apartment complexes, what would that look like? Is that a possibility? Because I know that is a concern that I've been hearing, is that people think that, hey, this is going to be, you say we don't really have a plan, they're going to decide later, and we believe that someone is going to swoop in and do something nefarious. So how do we prevent that or counteract that, or could that be potentially a possibility that someone could come in and do that?
So I think two things. One, you get to vote on everything, so you could always say no to it, even if that was a recommendation, right? But we asked our attorney over there, Joe Hatley, somebody mentioned at a previous meeting, a novel idea I haven't thought of. Can you put a rider or a resolution on the property that you can never sell it? Joe says basically, yes, you can do that, but it doesn't hold any water because a future board can just override it, because you cannot tie the hands of a future board's action. So you can make that symbolic statement, and that might be actually a powerful thing still to do, because it informs a future board of what your beliefs are and why. But it doesn't, Joe, am I right? It doesn't stop a future board from doing something different. But I would hope we give us space to recommend don't do that. You never know what's going to happen 20 years from now, 30 years from now. We've seen Miller Park go from an elementary to a middle school to a high school to a central office to what it's currently being used as. You've seen the site at Lee Summit Elementary, but prior to that was a high school as well. Repurposing an old building as a community changes is not unknown for our community.
Thank you. All right, so I know Board Member Eslick, Vice President Eslick, alluded to it earlier in the questions with the CAC representatives about kind of how the conversations went, is looking at the holistic approach, right, to the district. So not just focusing on one school that's a problem, but kind of looking at the bigger picture of things, right? Because if this area is declining enrollment and then you adjust it here, you causing another problem here that we're going to deal with later, and then another problem here, and specifically mentioned Woodland Elementary. So I was going to see if you could speak a little bit to that, as far as what that might look like as far as a plan for us to get a full district-wide approach, so that we can see that the whole district has been taken into consideration, instead of just focusing on this one issue that came to your attention, because of the 200 number. And then also, could you specifically comment, sorry, I'm kind of throwing a lot of things at you.
No.
As far as the whole district plan, but then also Woodland Elementary. And then I noticed on the presentation from 11-6 that Highland Park had a significant drop as well. So is that something that has been looked into, is why there's been declining enrollment there? And is that something that we would be hearing about in the future? Or, because I guess the concern would be, if they're seeing these significant numbers drop, they're going to think, are we next?
Can I start it off and you finish?
Yes, sir.
So Woodland, we have 6 subdivisions either about to be built or being expanded on right now in the Woodland area, and several hundred acres for sale that at some point will probably be developed. This allows us to not have to build another elementary in the Woodland area. Instead, Woodland can be a sponge and take all that growth up. We keep hearing about Highway 7 being upgraded and developed, sewer and water all the way down Highway 7, which will make it pop. When I first came, Kyle was looking for land for a 19th elementary because we were worried about the potential growth. This helps us. We don't need that. We don't need to buy another land and build another building. Plus, it's kind of fair to Greenwood that they go to Greenwood Elementary. Highland Park, you're right, and that could be a potential solution to the Mason growth, and Mason's not done growing. We do have 19 acres in Mason's attendance area for a future elementary, but it is so darn close to the current Mason Elementary, it doesn't make sense. We wouldn't be able to draw the boundaries well. So in the future, I'm probably gonna come to you and ask, can we sell that? But then Highland Park could take on some of the Mason growth and help out with that. And Dr. Shelton, I'll let you talk about Pleasant Lee Elementary and why it's important. I know it's also declined in enrollment, but just south of it, we got a lot of land about to be developed.
So I'm going to go back, and Vice President Eslick, you asked a question, and you're piggybacking on. I will bring a overarching global recommendation proposal to the board that talks about elementary, middle school, and high school, and not only current enrollment, projected enrollment, what that's going to do to building capacity and enrollment, and then how we can respond and not only respond then, but prepare to respond now. And so, yes, it's coming. And so, also, you had asked about, as you said, about why we did or didn't talk about Woodland. The charge to the CAC was very, I'll say, laser focused on the 25 bond and Prop C. And the only things about the 25 bond facilities were those things that were going to be considered for the 25 bond. Woodland, we didn't talk about Woodland because Woodland's not being considered. We didn't talk about Mason. And we talked about Pleasant Lee Elementary because they were on the list. And so there's a reason we didn't talk about them in that conversation. It was about facility needs and what is the most logical, likely, responsible projects to put on the list. That's what the CAC did this time, along with Prop C. So, yes, we are looking at current enrollment and projected enrollment. We know that there are going to be responses needed to that enrollment, to our current enrollment, and to our projected enrollment. Mason is a hotspot. This is, besides LSC and Westview, which we've talked about, the next most important thing we need to address in regards to attendance areas and enrollment and facility usage is Mason. What do we do with that? There are 2 or 3 options to respond to that, and I'm going to bring you those scenarios. If we move this Highland Park boundary to this location, this is how many students will be drawn into Highland Park and drawn out of Mason. If we move Underwood's boundary to this location or this location, this is how many students will be drawn out of Mason and into Underwood. So, and Richardson's right there, but Richardson is having some capacity issues, but do we maybe move some attendance out of Richardson into Highland? And so there's different scenarios to look at and pieces of this puzzle that we can discuss. There are, in my mind, some very easy, logical steps. This is the simplest solution to the problem that's in front of us. So Mason is job one, along with Lee Summit Elementary in Westview. Longer term, 5-10 year is Longview Farm, Summit Point, Trail Ridge, and Highland Park. Hawthorne Hill. Hawthorne Hill and Longview Farm will exceed capacity in the next 5 to 10 years, if projections are true. Summit Point and Trail Ridge will be in the 95s, 97%. They'll be where Mason is, not right now, but maybe in a year or two if we don't do anything. So we've got to do something in that southwest corner. The logical solution, once again, Steve Shelton's logical solution. We have Pleasant Lee Elementary, who is at 60%, and in 5 years, 10 years, they're going to be at 50% capacity. Pull that southern boundary of Pleasant Lee Elementary further south. There's a clear line. I believe it's, Rick, we talked about that road. It was Shrap. Nope. No. There's a road that we can, it's not Shears, south of Shears. There's a road to cut across, and a little bit further south than there, and there's a development right above Hawthorne Hill. And just to the north of that development is where PRI starts. That draw all of that into Pleasant Lee Elementary. Nobody's moved there yet. Anybody that buys a house there then would be going to Pleasant Lee Elementary. And so that's a logical solution to that problem in my mind. And so that's the third thing. That may expose Trail Ridge, and so we might need to draw Summit Point down into Trail Ridge. And in 5 to 10 years, Greenwood's going to have some room, and we can go a little bit further. We can go to 291 for Greenwood, south of 150, and so we've got some options there. Then you got Summit Point, you have the middle school, Summit Lake. Summit Lake Middle School is going to exceed capacity in 5 to 10 years. The logical solution is Pleasant Lee Middle School. Why it's important to do the work at Pleasant Lee Middle School in this bond is so that they can accept students from from the PRI land. And then you got West, once again, 5 to 10 years. They're going to exceed capacity. The logical solution is to pull that PRI land out of that attendance area and send it to Lee Summit High School. So yes, there are things that need to be done. It wasn't part of this discussion, but it does need to be brought forward. And so the recommendations that I am bringing to you are not done without thought and forethought of now and 5 years and 10 years.
Hazel Grove also, you were asking about that earlier. So Discovery Park, it's 2,900 apartments when it's fully built out. We think it's going to be a little over 200 kids. Of course, not all of them are going to be elementary. So you have some going there, but we also have in that North PRI land about 250 single-family homes is being called for. We don't think at that point maybe Underwood could take them, so we could reboundary. Right now it's just farmland, and have those kids also go to Hazel Grove. 250 single-family homes will bring a decent number of kids. So that'll allow Hazel Grove to take up the potential growth. It is interesting times if you even look in the back, decade after decade, as we've seen the core of our town age in place and have less kids, and on the boundaries, our population's growing and are younger. And we're just going to have to ride that wave just like our previous predecessors did for the past couple decades. And that's why you've seen so many moves, particularly in the south and southwest corner of our district, where things have changed fast. And we've had to make multiple big moves from elementary to elementary.
We'll probably talk about this later, but I am just curious why our demographic numbers don't reflect that if we are projecting growth. Is potential construction not part of the research when we do
Yes.
demographic studies?
I think Rick will talk to that later on.
Yes,
Okay.
it is part of it. Now,
Because the bubble maps are out, and I think your demographers talk to the city as well as he talks to developers. But the city is telling us when PRI is completely built out, which might be 25 years, another 40,000 people, another 40,000 residents. So we're just over 100,000 now. So it's almost a 40% increase in our population in the next 25 years where it's built out. But it's not built out where we're talking about Highland Park and Lee Summit Elementary. It's not near them. It's in a whole new area that right now is just corn and soybeans.
Right.
so I just want to touch on this one thing real quick. It's what I just described to you are things that we need to be thinking about and preparing for. But you get to the point of decision and action. And so, we've been watching Lee Summit Elementary in Westview. we've also been watching Mason. And, you know, you see the numbers. I see the numbers that Rick provides, and I see the projections that it's going to grow and it's going to grow. And that's what those projections are. But at some point, it happens. And at Mason, it's happening. We're at 92%, and they're building, and those kids are coming. And so we got to do something there. And the same thing, that same reality for me happened with Lee Summit Elementary in Westview. That been watching, okay, it's happened. And so it's time to act. So that, I just want you to know where my decision-making thought process goes through. What I just described to you on the southwest corner of the school district, you know, these are things we can put in place, but it might be that Trail Ridge pops first. Depends on who builds first. And do they build Eagle Creeks or do they build Windsors? You know, and it just depends. And so we put these plans in place, and when the data tells us, we move, or we don't.
Okay.
Sorry, do you got one more?
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
want to jump in.
So I appreciate that you're you know, discussing this plan, but I guess I really want to emphasize that we're going to see this plan.
Yes.
And that
yes.
this plan will be public information, and
Yes.
that people will not be caught off guard because of a decision that is seemingly at the last minute.
Right.
Because this was not public discussion months ago or years ago, as people would have anticipated and would have hoped and would have expected, when there's a potential closure that is going to take place, or redistricting. I want to make sure that we're having those conversations plenty of time ahead of time to warn people, you know, hey,
Yep.
if these numbers and this trend continues,
Yes.
this potentially could happen. And hey, guys, oh, the numbers are continuing in that direction.
I totally
We're going to have to make action and let people know, just so they're not caught off guard. I just want to really emphasize the importance of that, because I think that is kind of the biggest point of tension, I think, in this whole decision that we've had, is
Yes.
just how this has seemed so sudden, and not as many people were in the loop that should have been.
And I will own that. I've been here 2.5 years. You know, Board Member Haley said it really well one of our last meetings. You know, there's a lot of information coming. And so I've been consuming this information as quickly as I can and responding as quickly as I can to it. But I plan to be here a long time, and I plan to do exactly what you described, be able to foretell as best I can what our moves will be, and then make those moves when the time is right.
Okay. And I do have a couple more
Yes, ma'am.
questions, but I apologize. Board Member Haley has been waiting a while with his
Oh.
buzzer lit, so I want to give him an opportunity to
Yes,
ask his
that'd be
question.
great.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shelton. And I was a member of the CAC, so I was very intimately familiar with the process that was used in arriving at the recommendation. A comment that I would like to make, I am, based on the CAC recommendation, they're recommending over $100 million of our bonding capacity be used for elementary school buildings. And we're talking about declining enrollment in our elementary school buildings. And we're talking about closing one of our elementary school buildings that we just was made aware of a month or so ago. So I'm a little uncomfortable with us committing that much of our bonding capacity and asking the taxpayers to, you know, pony up $100 million for new elementaries without a more comprehensive approach. At this point, you know, just based on the information that we've gotten and we've been exposed to, it seems kind of like a whack-a-mole thing with us in November deciding we're going to want to close Lee Summit Elementary because of declining enrollment. So, I mean, we're asking the taxpayers, or potentially asking the taxpayers, for $100 million of their money to build elementary schools when we have declining enrollment in those areas. And so I would just feel a little more comfortable if we would take a deep breath and take a more comprehensive approach, and which can include and look like a lot of different things. I'm not suggesting I have the answers. I'm just suggesting I'm not comfortable with the information I have right now that we're making 100% the right choice.
Sure. And on the 19th, you mentioned the comprehensive approach. So once again, what Elaine and Stephen shared with you was very laser focused on 25. You know, we have 30-some buildings in the 32 buildings in our school district. They are all laid out currently on a four-phase, 20-year bond cycle for improvements or repair or whatever it may be. That 20-year cycle probably ought to be honest with you, be a 30 to 40-year cycle, maybe 50, and I'm going to adjust that. But there is a comprehensive plan. There is a comprehensive plan that shares when those projects are scheduled to be done. And I will tell you.
I'm assuming that your plan dovetails in with your demographics and
Yes.
all your projected increases
Yes.
and things of that nature.
Yes.
So, and you're going to share that plan with the rest of us?
Yes, sir. Like I've said a little bit ago. Yes.
Outstanding. Thank you, Dr. Sheldon.
Can I add to that also, it's the age of buildings. So if you think
Yes.
about what we did Mason Elementary, that was a 1940s building, just like Hazel Grove's 1940. 1910's the original portion of Greenwood. Not only is it much more efficient and a safer, it's now, Mason's now got a tornado place, where everybody can get in case of a tornado. They have safety glass, they have reinforced rooms that you can go to for intruder. There's a lot of features that have been updated in that building. So as we go through, we want to look at our older buildings that need to be updated, not only for efficiency, but also for safety. And so 75 to, I don't know have exact percent, 75 to 80% of the elementary costs are those two buildings, which are 1910 and 1940. So that's also a factor. It's not just enrollment on those two buildings.
Dr. Buck, you also had your button lit. Was there something else that you wanted to bring?
Yeah, I did want to interject since this was a question. But Dr. Shelton, I know you just said we're laser focused in 2025, but talk about 2030, what's coming up, and then 2035. So if something doesn't make the list in 25, what's the likelihood it makes it through 2030? And what's the big things that are not on 25 as being considered for 2030?
So as Stephen and Elaine referenced, we started this year knowing that there were some projects that would need to be done. Greenwood was one of those projects that we knew right off the bat. We were going to make sure that got on the list. And as they mentioned, the projects that that were considered but not on the list this time will be moved, I'll say, to the top of the list, if you will, in 30. So Pleasantly Elementary is one of those buildings. As I mentioned, that's going to be key for us. And so along with that, though, Lee Summit North is hanging out there. And that's going to consume, if you recall, we have $190 million earmarked for 2030. That's going to consume a significant amount of the bonding capacity. And then you add Pleasantly Elementary on there. That's going to consume a lot as well. And so now is the time. This list is a great list, and it is all work that needs to be done. And so if we don't do it now, I worry that whatever doesn't get done on the list that's being recommended to you might get squeezed out in 30. Because, to your point, what's on the next phase that's getting actually pushed down the list are the buildings that were built in the 70s. We have Meadow Lane. We do have a portion of Prairie View that have been considered in the past that have been tabled 2 or 3 times, just like Pleasantly Elementary now is going to be tabled for the second time.
Vice President Eslick?
Ooh, sorry, that was very aggressive. Is there anything that requires us to only go for bonds every 5 years, or could we feasibly say we want to go for a partial bond this year and a partial bond next year for the total value of the 225?
So I'll answer your question. There's nothing prohibiting us from doing any of that. It's what we can do based on our bonding capacity, based on our debt service levy, based on our current level of debt. So those are the pieces of the equation that allow us to go out and ask for funds. Also the projects that we want, the amount of the projects that we want to try to get done. So we can do 225 now. We can do 230 now. We can go up to 306 now. But we won't be able to go back to the voters until probably 2040 if we take all 306. And so, but if we wait, if we parse it out, that 306 actually, over a 10-year period of time, I believe comes 650. Don't hold me to that number. So if we spread it out rather than take it all at once. But there are school districts that go to the voters every 3 years. Matter of fact, if you look back in the history of Lee Summit, I think there was a period of time where they would go every 2 or 3 years and go out and get smaller chunks of money.
When I
Thank
first came here, I asked the same question to CAC. They feel, and Elaine and Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong, they feel that if you do it every 5 years, you get such a wide breadth that it affects more kids and more communities, that's better for passing bond issues. So
Yeah.
we did used to do it every 2 years. I think North Kansas City still does it every 2 years. Blue Springs has done a couple back-to-back. And sometimes districts will do phases. So like Park Hill's considering a 2-phase coming up where they can do one now and finish a project with a second one on the same exact project at one of their high schools. So there is no rules to it other than you have to fit in your bonding capacity. But I think CAC has said it's a better strategy to have a lot of things on one bond.
I would say, from a project standpoint, for us, and I've seen this done in other districts as well, that 5 years is, summer, you have year one build or renovation, year 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that 5th year is kind of, you're cleaning up, finishing up, wrapping up, getting geared up then for the next cycle.
Right.
And so it kind of gives you a kind of a rhythm, if you will, as you go through the process.
Thanks. Just a comment. The reason for the question is really just for the benefit of the board to have the conversation, to know that it's not all or bust. I mean, I just think that we can have a dialogue that doesn't just include it's either everything or nothing when it comes to certain portions of the projects that we're considering. So I just really wanted to highlight that and make sure that we're all considering that in our conversations. Thanks.
So I have another question here. So someone brought forward the idea of just putting pre-K in all of our elementary schools as a way to combat declining enrollment. Would you be able to speak a little bit about that, if that option has been considered, if that would be feasible, what that might look like? Is that something that we would consider in the future? How that relates to this, because that was one of the things that was put forward as a recommendation of how we could potentially save LSE and Westview as they are in place is by adding pre-K.
CAC did consider that last year when they made a pre-K recommendation, so who else was were you on that CAC last year as well? I don't remember. I know Erica was, because Erica told us earlier. They considered that last year. What they appreciate about having one single site was then they have their own administration, counselor, nurse, everybody focused on pre-K kids. But they did look at satellite classrooms throughout the district of pre-K. But then you would just use the nursing and the counseling staff and the principals of that building. So they would be a pre-K through 5 counselor, nurse, because there's only one classroom here, one classroom there. So that was the conversation at CAC, but they considered it last year. Like that was a model they considered, and they chose that it wasn't the model they thought was best for our younger learners.
Okay. Knowing that, would it be possible to get maybe some of the notes from those discussions so the board can consider that when we're looking ahead?
I'll see what Katie wrote down as our secretary.
Okay. Now, if there's no other questions at this moment on the bond recommendation, I know we are going to have additional opportunity for questions on December 19th. I was going to go ahead and kind of change real quick and just ask a question about Prop C. But I just wanted to check in with the board and see if we're good to go ahead and kind of move in that direction. Okay. All right. So I know we've been divided on the Prop C recommendation. And so I just wanted to ask about in October 22nd in the Creative Entourage presentation, One of the slides that was presented said, with all that's going on in Jackson County, now is not a good time to even consider a ballot proposal when it comes to raising taxes. And the response of that was 55% that agreed or strongly agreed. Right, so I wanted to verify that I'm speaking accurately in that.
I don't have that study in front of me, but I believe generally the sentiment of what you're saying is true, yes.
Okay. All right, so in that, if the desire of the board is to not follow the CAC recommendation, knowing that this was actually a very split decision for the CAC on that, I guess this would be a question to the rest of the board. Do we want to have maybe a conversation about how we're feeling as far as that recommendation? Whether we want to have Prop C on the April ballot, what that looks like before we get to the meeting later this month?
Sure. Want to talk about it? Do you want me to say something? I'll just say I'm not in favor of it. So I don't really have a lot to say, but we've talked about Prop C a lot over the last 2.5 years. It's come up several times. I've never really been in favor of it. For me, I feel like we have a lot of work to do in the way that we manage the resources that we have to make me feel comfortable enough that I would say we need to go back to the taxpayer to ask for more money. We clearly have some declining enrollment. We have some facilities that are partially full. We haven't really talked through all of that. And I'm not confident enough to say that we are using all of the resources at our disposal to be able to say that we should go back to the voter with our hands out. So that's my personal position. So I wouldn't support it.
If we could, I know we need to address, they've made a recommendation, so we need to give an answer, right? Do we give them that answer in December, or do we wait to May? Because you would more want to consider on August versus don't do it. So I think that's probably, when do we want to give a discussion and make a decision based on the recommendation? In December 19th or May board meeting or April board meeting?
Well, do we want to put it up for a vote at all if we're just going to vote it down? I mean, do we have to?
I do think we owe it to them to
Okay, I
vote
understand.
yay or nay on the recommendation.
Okay, I just
But
didn't know if we would want to, if we know we don't have board support, is that something that we would want to do? And that's just a question. I don't know the answer.
Board Member Myers?
I think I just got confused. Are we talking about Prop C in general support, or are we talking about what date do we put it on a ballot? I got lost just now.
So either or. I think the general conversation is that the recommendation from the CAC was April or August, but the ultimate recommendation was April. So if you are, I mean, people can be in support or not in support of Prop C in general, but do we want to put it on the ballot in April? Because if so, then we have to have it on our agenda in mid-December to have that vote. So do we want to move forward with putting it on for December, or do we want to have that discussion later in May? Knowing if we have it in May, then that means it's not on the April ballot.
Can I ask a question? So maybe I missed a meeting. I didn't know we didn't have board support for Prop C. Like, I don't think I've heard, but I haven't talked to everyone. So are we saying right now no one supports Prop C?
Well, I think that's kind of the point of having this conversation, is to feel everybody out and see where they're sitting.
Right.
So
I guess
I know
I'm
there's a
wondering where
few board
Heather's
members that have been
comment came-
vocal, but some have
Right.
not. So we want to give everybody the opportunity to talk about it.
I think it was the year before you were elected. We had a
Oh.
conversation about Prop C at that point, and it's come up in the past, just not, I don't know that it's ever come up since you've been on the board for a vote, but we have had dialogue about it prior to, and I've voted no. That was the genesis of my comment. That's all.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant like right now we don't have support.
I'm only speaking for me.
Okay.
I'm not speaking for anyone else on the board. I'm simply saying if you asked me to vote today, my answer would be no.
Right.
Just
Okay,
me.
cool. Thank you for the clarification. I was going to say, I think my expectation, just going up to this point, was that we were going to hear it here and we were voting on it in December. That was my understanding, and if we change that, I guess we'll do whatever we have to do to change that, but that was my expectation. But I can say now, the Prop C waiver as it is stated, to support, I'm so sorry.
Salaries.
To support salaries, I am generally in support of it, especially considering we didn't support the budget that was presented to us that impacted the salaries, that could impact the salaries. So, I mean, kicking it down the road, doesn't that mean we're spending more money to put it on August? And we're talking about saving money or being more conservative with how we spend it, whatever. But that's my personal opinion. But I mean, that's what I thought. I thought we were learning today to vote December 19th.
Thank you. Board Member Myers?
Yeah, so I want to follow up on part of what Vice President Eslick said, and I mean, the numbers speak for themselves in terms of enrollment issues and things of that nature. However, I think we are educating a wider span of students today with a wider span of needs even that we were 10 years ago. And so the supports that are in place are more so now and probably need to continue to be more so. And so that ends up with personnel issues. And so, we don't want to shortchange our kids on facilities and space, but we also don't want to short our kids on necessary supports that they need. So I think I've said I'm kind of more of the proponent of putting it on an August ballot for the purpose that I would really like to see the best possible result for the no tax increase bond and that campaign to be focused and be able to be successful. Especially we're talking about merging two schools together and things like that. There's a lot of things going on with this. So, and I know that it might cost a little bit more money in the long run, but we don't know what else other Jackson County municipalities and Cass County are going to have to put on a ballot by then anyway, because we're all kind of in the same boat financially. So, but I did think that we were making that decision in December, but I guess I'm telling you where I guess I'm at on it. I think it's an opportunity for the voters to determine with regards to additional staffing and just in keeping up with cost of living increases and all the different employee groups that, we're trying to meet their needs in Team Lee Summit. So maybe I might be a little bit off topic, but that's, I guess, where I'm at.
So just to kind of clarify, some of the discussion that was had is if it's going to be on the August ballot, and that is the way that the board is leaning, then it is better to have the discussion in May and to make that vote in May and not even have necessarily the vote in December to just say, here's the recommendation for April, we're voting no. We can forego that and just push it back until May for August, if that is the direction that we want to take. But if we're wanting to have it in April, then we need to have it in the December or January meeting for that to take place.
But we might not be the same board in May. So I don't know how that factors into that equation. Okay.
Board Member Miller?
Thank you. So what I guess just weighing in, big picture, I am in support of meeting the needs of the salary increase for our staff. Like, I want to make sure that happens for our staff, and that's really important. I think at the forefront of my decision-making with this, I am supportive of putting it on the ballot in April. I don't think it's fiscally responsible to move it to August for taxpayers. And so if again, if we were, and I'm similarly to Board Member Johnson and Board Member Myers, I also thought we were hearing the information today and voting in December. And so that's kind of where my head was at with gathering the information, taking it in, having a discussion, and then doing the vote in December, so.
So, yeah, we can leave this as an item on the agenda for the December meeting to have the discussion. It was just, if the board was very clear in one direction or another, then that would give the administration direction on how to move forward, and could avoid having issues later in the month if it wasn't necessary. So it sounds like I don't hear a unanimous direction one way or the other, so I think we'll probably just bring this discussion back up in the December meeting.
Can I ask a follow-up question? This is more procedural, so if we say no, I think I'm hearing an undertone of we know the board is not going to support this for April. And so if it's not supported in April, can we discuss it again and put it on August? Is that a procedural thing we can do?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Timeline for August, we have to take it to all three election boards by May 27th, 2025. So we can take it as early as April 8th, but the latest we could take it is May 27th.
So that means if that happens, the new board would have to make a decision pretty quickly, even though, if there's a new board.
There is a weird world where you could vote it and say put on August, and then the new board could undo it. There's a certain date when they don't let you take something back off. We've had that with board candidates before. They filed, and then there's a date later on that you can take something back off. And once you get past that, you can't come back off of it. So you saw that in our latest presidential election with a third-party candidate.
Okay. With that, do we have any more questions before we move on to the next agenda item? All right. With that, Dr. Shelton, are you going to introduce? I am. All right. For 2.02, Applied
Thank you.
Economics, LLC.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Rick Bramer. Rick works for Applied Economics and has performed our demographic study for now 22, I think? 22 years. 22 years. And so he has been in and around our community a number of times and has great relationships with the city and developers and a number of folks to help gather information as well as qualitative and as well as quantitative. Mr. Bramer, turn over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Shelton. Good evening, folks. President Foley, Vice President Eslick, members of the board, Dr. Buck. My pleasure to be here tonight. Sounds like we've got a lot to talk about. So demographics are important. Demographics are confusing. Demographics are changing as rapidly as I have ever seen them. I've been doing this work for about 35 years. We've served over 100 school districts in 4 states, most of them for, again, periods of 10, 15, or 20 years. Just helping people navigate the waters that is public education these days. There's a lot of things to consider. Funding is always one of the most prime considerations, of course, but it's not the most important thing always. I believe one of the board members alluded to that. I kind of liked that idea. Our scope of services for the district is, it varies a little bit from year to year, but essentially this is what we do, is we analyze, obviously, enrollment data. Total enrollment, grade level distribution, the geographic distributions, going down and looking at what's happening at the neighborhood level. And then understanding what's going on, how that translates into our schools, into the attendance area numbers, which is, strictly by boundary, but then also by our schools, because we do have magnet programs and a little bit of movement between our campuses. So those really aren't the exact same measurement. Looking at the demographic characteristics of the population. Housing construction is very cool and exciting, and you see the lumber go up and all, everybody's having a lot of fun. But, we're building way less than 1,000 housing units a year, and there's 43,000 housing units in the district already. So what's happening with the existing population is actually more important in some ways than what's happening with the construction that you see. And particularly looking at the age and the tenure, owner versus renter structure of households. Because that really is what drives the school-age population. I'm going to throw some numbers, some terms at you. School-age population, all persons living in the district age 5 to 17. That corresponds with kindergarten through 12th grade. So we're going to talk about school-age population. Residential development impacts, they are substantial where they happen. They're point source things. Enrollment declines happen all over the whole district. Additions happen in really small places. And that's part of the challenge in managing the growth process. We do two sets of enrollment projections, actually. We do a macroeconomic top-down, how does Lee Summit fit into Jackson County and into the greater Kansas City area? So a really top-down approach. However, the one that's probably made us the most fame, if you will, is looking at the neighborhood level, the sub-district stuff, so that we can understand where the district number is coming from and understand that every neighborhood is not in the same position. And we use those two models independently at first. I run this one, and see what, if the answers come up different, then we work to try to balance those two together. And then the final piece, which we obviously do not do every year, is assisting the district with doing attendance area changes and looking at the location for potential facility sites. We are in the process of putting together a boundary planning tool that will enable Dr. Shelton to do those what-ifs a lot more quickly than we've been able to in the past, and develop a plan that he'll be able to bring forward to you that does look at not only where we are today, but looking over the future, because nobody likes boundary changes. Even when you're building a new school, nobody really likes it all that much. So when you're doing a boundary, we're looking at not only the numbers today, but 5 years from now, and even 10 years from now, realizing 10 years from now is a long time and a lot can happen. But still, when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of facilities, you have to give it, as much diligence as you possibly can. I'm going to start off just really quickly by talking about the sub-district areas. A little bit obscured on this map because I wanted to cram a lot on here. The red boxes that you see that divide up the district, they're somewhat obscured by the dots, which are the current students that are enrolled in the district. But the red boxes are there's 171 of those. We call them grids for short. We know how many students you served from every one of those boxes for the last 20 years. So when I'm doing enrollment projection, I'm not just looking at it now or even 5 years ago. I know what's been happening all the way back to 2002 in every single one of those red boxes. The purple dots overlaid on top of this map, like I said, are the concentration of the students. We have the majority of the students are located fairly near the central part of the district, but also, the big clump in the southwest. Where you pass over this land that we've been talking about tonight, PRI. The reason why the distribution of enrollment looks like it does is because Property Reserve Incorporated has held that land forever. And ever since I've been here, we've been speculating about when they're going to sell it, because that's what they do. It is an investment arm of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they make long-term land holding and sale decisions. The most important thing I want you to understand about that is they don't do anything random, and they don't do anything fast. And if they've decided that they're going to sell this land, they're going to sell it. And whether it's tomorrow or 2 years from now or even 5 years from now, their time frame is a little different, but they have decided to move this from their long-term investment profile to their short-term development profile. And that's a decision that they only can make every 5 years, the way they are structured. So they have made that decision here. So regardless of the timing, it's going to happen. And one of the interesting things about the uneven distribution of students, you get the big clump in the middle, and then of course you got the Lakewood clump up north in the southwest corner, and then you got the Chapman Farms clump, is it makes things like transportation and facility planning extra difficult. If you could imagine if the district was a perfect square and all the kids were distributed totally normally, you could draw a line anywhere you want and you'd get, approximately the same number of kids. We have to be really cognizant when we're drawing our lines to understand that, you can move a line and not get any kids, or you can move a line and get a whole bunch of kids. And the planning tool that we're putting together will allow us to look, at those kind of concepts too. Starting back over with kind of the biggest picture, which is total district level enrollment. And this is 40th day headcount enrollment. It's what's reported to the state every year on the last Wednesday of September. And the red squiggly line is the year-over-year percent change. And you go back to the beginning of the graph in the early 2000s, continuing through 2007, 2008 or so, had a very high level of home building going on in the district. Enrollment grew by hundreds of students per year normally. That's just the way it was. And then we hit the recession, the Great Recession. So about 2009, 2010, everything comes screeching to a halt. And at about that same time, a lot of the easily available private land in the district for single-family development was absorbed. The boom was so big that the easy stuff to build was built. And so a lot of the projects, there wasn't enough big projects coming in. So even when the economy started to recover, you'll see the lines start to go back up in about 2014 or so. It wasn't with anywhere near the same vigor, that the market had before. And then comes along, of course, we're kind of putting along with that concept. Population starts to age faster than we're building houses, and then hits COVID. And so you see, the big downward V in the red line there in 2021, where you, just like everyone else in the country, had significant enrollment losses. The interesting part of that whole thing to me is that they didn't come back. It was one thing, some of them did. You can see we had a little bit of positive growth in 21, 22. But the fascinating thing from a demographic standpoint is that people were exposed to different homeschooling options. There was millions and billions of dollars spent to put in infrastructure to support homeschooling options. And some people decided they actually liked it better. And the more affluent an area is, the more they didn't come back. In places where I work, where people are generally of lower socioeconomic status, don't have the luxury of staying home and doing this and doing that, enrollment came right back up. But you're enough of a move up, affluent area that people just didn't have to do that. And since then, you can see enrollment has basically been stable. I even hate to call it a decline. It's really just been bouncing along stable. Up 50 and down 40 is not anything that we think of as change. We're really basically constant. Now, we've built quite a few houses in the meantime. As I said, between, we're back down to the 2010, 2011 enrollment levels, even though 6,000 housing units, have been added during that period of time. And that's the aging of the population, and that's birth rates. And we're going to talk about that in greater detail here in just a minute. Since 1819, we're down by about 700 students. Big jump, about 2/3 of that was the pandemic hit, with very little decline after that. The other thing that's really changing in the district is the distribution of enrollment by grade. So if you go back to when growth was really happening, 2002 through 2007, high school enrollment was the fastest growing group, but they're all close together, and K2 was also experiencing some pretty significant growth. you see the K2 enrollment, the average enrollment per grade in that group peaked clear back in 2011, 2012. And because you're a move-up housing market, in other words, people move in with older kids. So your classes grow as they go through time, not shrink. Some districts are exactly the opposite. Yours grow as they go over time. And the more prices go up and the more affluent the area gets, the bigger the spread gets. And so you can see that, K2 enrollment has been trending down, as I said before, since 2011, 2012. Took the big hit with COVID. That was the most impacted cohort everywhere. And then stabilized a bit, been down the last couple of years. We've got some unusually big drops in birth rates 5 years ago that are hitting us right now. So again, it probably looks worse than it is, but these curves do tend to follow each other over time. I mean, in your case, the 9-12 line will always be above the K2 line, but they can get a lot closer together than they are now. So one of the ways to look at that is just visually. Don't look at any of the numbers, just look at the colors. This is the number of students in each class by grade going back to 2002. And so you can see in 2002, we had almost exactly the same number of kindergartners as we did seniors in high school, with a total of 14,800 students. As of this year, the 12th grade class is 50% larger than the kindergarten class. The kindergarten class this year took, as I said, a big hit, and you'll see a little bit later how that's related to some of our birth rate information. But the picture is that the smaller the lower grades are, eventually that'll get to the upper grades, unless you have a whole lot of, a tremendous number of housing units being built. And just to illustrate how the move up part of it works, is that if you look here at 9th grade this year, it's got 1,481 students. Those kids started in kindergarten as 1,253 kindergartners. So, we did gain, 230 or so during the process, which is a pretty significant bump. That's about a 15 to 20% growth in that class during that period of time. And you can see the one right behind it is much smaller. So guess what? Next year we're going to have a small 9th grade class. And that's going to actually start driving our high school enrollment down just a little bit temporarily as that class kind of goes through the system. But the curve is exaggerated. And I'm worried that over time, those lines are going to get closer together, because you can only get 200 growth, but I've got a 500 difference. And so the fact of the matter is, right now, every year, you're graduating 1,600 seniors. You're bringing in 1,000 kindergartners. So you're starting off right out of the get-go, 600 loss, right?
And Rick, so I've said this many times, we almost have to grow 500 kids in all the other grades to break even.
Exactly right.
And we have been
He said
doing
it better
that.
than I did. What?
We've been doing that, but that is a significant growth of people moving in.
Correct.
And if you look at North Kansas City, their senior class is almost the same size as ours, but their kindergarten class is almost the same as their senior class. And that's why they're the second largest district and we're the 6th largest district in the state, because they have probably more striation of housing product than we currently have.
Definitely, just a larger market, and like you said, a lot more options in terms of housing. Which, flash forward ahead, one of the things PRI land is probably going to bring to the Lee Summit School District, at least the southern portion, is a lot more housing options in terms of densities. From, what we're used to seeing, the 3 to 4 to 5 to acre, up to maybe 8 or 10 units per acre, single family. Which makes it affordable, which may bring in, which they're hoping is going to bring in families that can actually afford to buy houses in Lee Summit again. So that's a different soapbox. Anyway, it's important to understand what you're up against. Like you said, you're automatically losing 500. So don't think you don't have growth, because you do. They are coming in. Getting back to our little grids, our 171 squares, this just shows where the student density is. Now, the little red number is the actual number of K-12 students coming out of that grid this year. The coloring, because the grids are different size, I have to normalize the coloring on a per square mile basis. So that's really your density. So you have density, you know, as some areas as high as 750 students per square mile, which begins to look like a fairly formidable, you know, heavily suburban, heavily family area. But then you have a lot of other areas that are developed but are still not that dense. Again, move-up housing market. A lot of big lot stuff, and then up along Coburn Road and out towards Lone Jack, you know, a lot of low-density rural and estate type development. Takes up a lot of land. You see the houses, but you know the density just isn't there to get a lot of students out of it. As interesting as that is, and it's really important, of course, when we're doing our planning, like when we're doing our what-ifs. So if you pick up, you know, this entire area, you've only got 33 kids. I pick up this one little area, I've got 187. So, like I said, it's not an even thing. This one is good because it shows the last 5 years, the change in enrollment by each of these planning grids. And wherever you see blue, there's been a loss in enrollment over the last 5 years. And then wherever you see red, of course, there's been an increase. And essentially, like I said before, the losses have been literally district-wide in the established areas, everywhere that's been built in the past. Everywhere where you see red, it's you know, new development at Chapman Farms, it's at Woodland Trails, it's at Stony Creek, it's at Hook Farms, it's those places where you see it pop out. But what ends up happening over time, and in some districts worse than others, is that you'll have this problem of you have the school here, it's got seats in it, but all the new houses are over there. And you have to decide how you're going to handle that. And where I come from, we can't afford overhead. So if you open a school, you have to close one. That's just the way it works, pretty much. And so, you know, the fact of the matter is that it's part of the life cycle of the population and of a community. It's just part of what happens. But it's also, I think about it in perpetuity. So when it comes back to the question of what do we do with Lee's Summit Elementary School, you do what you want with it, but I would never sell the land. I would never, ever sell a piece of land that I own that has a school on it right now, because you don't know 30, 40, 50 years from now what it's going to look like. You know, so I've seen a lot of community gardens, I've seen soccer fields, I've seen all kinds of things go on to school sites lately. But buildings and principals are expensive. Janitors are expensive. Insurance is expensive. Don't feel like, you know, there's no cost to having, you know, that it's the same cost to have 200 schools as one 400 school. That's not true. That is never going to be the case. Now, you may be able to afford to have the 200s, but you're not going to give those kids the same program that you're going to get at one 400. You just physically or fiscally can't do it. Demographics behind this whole thing. Total population's increased obviously dramatically since 2000, from 73,000 folks up to our estimate for last year of about 107,000 people. During that period of time, though, there's been quite a few population age shifts, and so it used to be that the population under 18 was 30% of the population, 29% of the population. Now it's down to 26. Doesn't sound like a huge drop, but it is. It actually turns into, you know, hundreds of students. One of the most distressing things, of course, is that the under 5 group continues to get smaller, and that's where it all starts. And so as long as that cohort's getting smaller, then it's going to be difficult for the other ones to get much bigger. Those losses are directly linked to, as I said before, the age structure of the householders. So if you look back at 2000, 48.6%, almost half of the households were headed by persons in those prime childbearing ages, that 35 to 44, 45 to 54, those are where the elementary and high school students generally come from, is out of those households. So that's fallen by 20%, from 50% of the population down to about 40% of the population. And, you know, recently the declines in the 45 to 54 group have actually been larger than in the 35 to 44. And so that's part of what's going to be hitting our high schools here in the near term. We talked a little bit earlier about birth rates, and this is a national phenomenon. This is not a Missouri thing or a Jackson County thing. This is a national phenomenon. And so birth rates I'm going to follow the red line for us. That's Jackson County. I do have Clay County and the state of Missouri on here as a reference, so you can see how you can compare. But, you know, since 2006, the birth rate in Jackson County has fallen by 27%. The number of births, number of babies being born in Jackson County is 20% less now than it was in 2006. And one of the things that's hitting us right now is this last little drop. I talked about an extraordinarily big drop this year that would be affecting, you know, our kindergarten enrollment as we get up into this time period. Overall, since 2011, kindergarten enrollment in this district has fallen by 13%. The number of births has fallen by 16%. So we've had a little bit of that growth. People moved in, you know, but that weren't born here. But overall, you know, those things follow each other. One of the good things is that 21 was actually a bit of a surprise. Nationally, we're seeing birth rates, I wouldn't say rise, but bottom out. Generally, most demographers feel like we've kind of seen the lowest birth rates that we're going to see. And those all came from the Great Recession, oddly enough. People saw their parents be so damaged by the economic crisis that they decided that wasn't going to happen to them, and they put off the decision to have children. So in the space of 10 years, the average age at first birth went up by 5 years. So it just created a sort of a one-time phenomenon that probably won't continue. Now, that said, it takes 2.2 births per female lifetime to have zero population growth. The United States of America right now is at 1.7 births per female lifetime. So as it stands right now, the population of our entire country is set to decline. You know, unless we have extraordinarily amounts of foreign immigration. But the fact of the matter is that these things do go hand in hand, and it's what's driving the enrollment in the schools. Residential development. These are just permitted housing units going clear back to the year 2000. I wanted you to see that back in the 2000s, you know, we were building 800, 900, 1,000 single-family homes per year. And when you have that, that's when you get the real growth in the school-age population, is you come out of those kind of numbers. And then you can see what happened during the Great Recession, where we went to literally, I think it was 143 houses were built in 2010, 2011. And so bouncing up out the other side hasn't been much of a bounce in terms of single-family. Multifamily's gotten real popular for a lot of different reasons. Economic development being one of the biggest ones here, is there's so many jobs being created. And with the impact of Summit Technology Campus and all those kinds of things, it's bringing people, you know, here that are looking for that type of housing. And as someone else alluded to earlier, most of the new apartments that we have seen built, you know, in the last 5 years, we're getting less than 0.1 students per unit. And the ones around the Summit Technology Campus, I think we get 5 out of both of those complexes put together. So it's not like just seeing, you know, rooftops go up means there's going to be more kids. We're still, you know, lingering in this 400 range or less for the single-family units, which is really what's driving, you know, your school-age population. So that's fairly sluggish. Probably won't be forever. I'm going to show you 2 maps, and I might go back and forth between them. This one's awfully hard to read. I apologize. But this is the land inventory that we keep of the district. Now, it's obviously not all land. All of this is already developed. All of this is not, there's no particular plans on it. There's infill, but there's no particular plan development. But everywhere you see color otherwise, there's something that we know about that could happen. Now, where you see red, well, I'll back up first. Where you see gray is non-residential. So we track non-residential lands also because we want to know where there's not going to be kids just as much as we want to know where there's going to be kids. But in the other ones, we do it by a priority system. Wherever you see red on this map is an active development. So as I said before, parts of Chapman Farms, you know, Woodlawn Estates, I was there today, looks like they're putting up quite a few houses out that way. Foxbury Estates, Woodland Trails, those are the big active projects right now. Eagle Creek recently built out a couple of years ago. You probably know somebody who lives there. But Hook Farms picked right back up and is, you know, going like gangbusters. And then when you get into the other colors, the orange is what we would say coming up next. And as I say in this note down here, it's more the order that'll happen, not exactly a year, you know. Normally, however, active is active. Priority 1 means 1 year. Priority 2 means 2 to 3 years. The rest of it gets kind of fuzzy after that. But we line up and inventory these projects every year and collect information, as someone else alluded to, from the planning departments in every city in the district every year to gather this information. So altogether, this represents the potential, just the colored, non-gray area you see, well, not including the parks, has the potential for about 40,000 housing units. So again, that's another, you know, another PRI-sized project plus. About 58% of that would be single family homes. I said the timing is more, you know, in the order, not the year. One of the things I want to point out to everybody that may have been in the community or may not have is that this area right here, around the Barber Quarry, from 7 north of 50 Highway, until last year, we had this in for long-term single-family development. Their operational permit was set to expire in 2029, and we were told that 2029, and we were told that it wasn't going to get reauthorized. They wanted the land. They were going to redevelop. Lake Lonawana turned around and signed a 150-year extension on the operating agreement for the quarry, which means this land's going nowhere. So it actually took about 3,000 potential housing units right off of the table. So just something else to know about. In fact, they're going to build in a buffer along the east side of 7 now because they're anticipating so many more trucks and so much more dust that they think they're going to have to protect, you know, this area from any development, even on the other side of the highway. So, you know, obviously not a big boon for future rooftops in that area. But plenty of other projects, and while, you know, development can occur anywhere, the majority of the single-family homes occur in what I would like to call major developments. And major is a somewhat, you know, nebulous term. I mean, it can be, you know, 100 acres or 1,000 acres, but generally, because of infrastructure and all those things, that's generally where development occurs. And so you things like see like Chapman Farms, Woodlands and Chapman Farms, all of these are, you know, projects. That's where single-family development occurs. I think I wanted to point that out and talk about PRI because it's the game changer. Right now, I feel like we're stuck in neutral in some ways. You know, the housing development that we've had in the last 5 to 7 years has been just enough to offset the declines of aging and the declines from the birth rates. It's like we're not getting ahead, we're not going behind. This is a game changer in that when you bring on, you know, 3,000 odd acres under multiple different developers, under a motivated seller, you know, we're guessing. I mean, have to guess. The city's given us some great direction. They've got their plans in place. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And think of this as 8 Eagle Creeks. So if you built 8 Eagle Creeks, how many schools, you know, might you need? That's the kind of level of impact that we're talking about. As Dr. Buck alluded to, that could be a 20 or 25-year, you know, proposition. I'm not saying they're all going to be there tomorrow, but it's a true game changer. And the thing is that since we've had development here for a long time, and we've had to develop here because this land was, was held, infrastructure's already there for the most part. A lot of the major infrastructure they need along Ward and Pryor is already in place. So it's not gonna take them a real long time to get this rolling once they start selling parcels. And once they, I know a land broker works in the Kansas City area who has letters of interest from multiple home builders ready to go as soon as this land hits the market. What's gonna happen? Well, assuming that goes, these projections, assuming the PRI project goes. Oh, I would say one more thing too, is that I think Dr. Buck alluded to it too, is that they also have this northern holding, and the 256 homes he was talking about are basically right here in this corner of the land parcel closest to the park. Most everything along along 470 here will be resident or industrial and office type of uses. Altogether, out of that 40,000 potential, well, for one thing, I'll say that, in the last 10 years, or since 2010, there's been 7,000 units added and about 6,500 households. But that's only increased the school-age population by about 1,900 persons. That's population, persons aged 5 to 17. So while the average is about 0.5 of those persons per household, lately, because of the aging, we've been losing about half of the benefit of every one of those. So the net gain has only been about 0.275 per household. Over the next 10 years, we're looking at the addition of about 11,700 housing units, just about half and half, single family and multifamily. But that still leaves us with about, close to 6,000 single family units. So boosting that rate of production from 300-ish a year to about 600 units per year is probably just a good way to think about it. And I'll tell you what, that's really conservative. Not so much in the beginning, but if what happens in PRI, if what I think is gonna happen happens, it'll go over that. I just hate to get too far out over my skis when I'm doing long-term projections. That'll generate about 10,200 new households. That's an occupied housing unit, and about 2,000 more school-aged persons. So we're still going to be suffering from the offsets from the aging of the population and continuing lower birth rates than we've seen in the past. But we're still looking at about 2,000 more school-aged persons in the district, which would result in about 1,700 more students over the next 10 years. In the beginning, the K-5 group stays, pretty much the size it is now. However, when you get, to the middle and the end of the projection period, it really starts to pick up. And I think when we start getting the higher production levels in the housing, that's when those numbers will start to pick up. We've got a bump coming up in the 6th to 8th grade group in the next few years, and then some growth. And then in the high school group, as I alluded to before, probably some slight declines the next couple of years, but then again, taking back off with some pretty good growth. So altogether, about 1,800 students over the next 10 years. And at the school level, it's a little harder to see, I suppose, and we're not going to go number by number, of course, but hitting the high points, I think we talked about with PRI, Hawthorne Hill, Longview Farm, and Trail Ridge, we're all going to see some pretty significant increases in enrollment, along with, continued growth out Mason Way. But losses in a lot of other schools. So, the net in the short term probably isn't going to be much of an increase. But when you look out, even 5 years to 10 years, which is a perfectly appropriate time for facility planning, for things like buying land, you want to be looking out at least 5 years, if not 7 or 8, because prices of land will do nothing but go up. As I alluded to, the 6th to 8th grade group, we've got a bump coming through. There'll be some pretty good gains in the next 5 years, followed by a little loss. And then the high school group, Slower growth the first 5 years, about 300 students, but then about 500 in the second 5-year period. But again, adding, about 850 or so students each of the time periods. The distribution kind of reflects what we were just talking about with the PRI being the big impact, with Summit Lakes, obviously, and Lee Summit West High School being the big recipients of students, at least as the attendance areas are defined today. So enrollment did decline this year a little bit. It's the low birth rates and the aging of the existing population. It's just like I said, it's been kind of a neck and neck race. Up 1 year, down year and year, up 1 year, down 1 year. The home construction is really expected to accelerate over the next 5 years. We're going to get lots of new kids in the neighborhoods where we're going to get them. But as I keep saying, some of that increase is going to be offset elsewhere because the population of the existing housing stock, which is this big compared to this big, is continuing to age. We haven't gotten to the point where that's going to break even yet. By the second 5-year period, however, that could change. We're seeing that we're going to be bottoming out in terms of those neighborhoods, and we'll see some growth, or at least stabilization, return to most parts of the district. We're looking for that single-family construction increase really to take off in about 26, 27. The projections you're seeing right now, that we did last year, we actually didn't do an update this year. Had the PRI project taking off in 25 and 26, we'll probably push that back a year based on what I know right now today. The progress they've made in the last year, but like I said before, it's just if. It's not. I mean, it's just when. It's not if. It's going to happen. And the district has great potential for future growth in so many different ways. It's well positioned economically. It's a quality community, and I think the PRI is going to bring in a different set of home builders, and like I said, different products. Things you haven't seen here before. It's going to be an exciting time for the community, but it's going to be some growing pains too. But pretty positive about your community, and I'd take any questions you guys have. While you're thinking, I was just going to comment that. We said the losses have been, kind of across the district. But, what we've seen in downtown and in the Westview community have been some fairly substantial declines. And we had a project that was supposed to come online just west of Douglas Road along Tudor that would have brought in 400 or 500 housing units, different types, different densities. And the land has gotten too expensive. People don't want that for residential anymore. If you see what's happening along Douglas Road, it's all going to be industrial and office and retail. And there'll be some apartments, more apartments around Summit Center, but I expect they're going to be like the ones that are there now. They're all occupied by, younger people with no kids.
Thank you very much. Board Member Haley?
Thank you. Appreciate your presentation. Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. It looks like based on this school projection slide, if you want to slide back there to it, the one just prior to the conclusions, it looks like you're basically projecting a 10% increase in total enrollment over the next 10 years for our total enrollment. My question is going to be centered on how are the homeschool projections and private school projections calculated in that calculus that you're using?
It's a good question, and they are. Because like I pointed out, we are projecting about a 2,000 person increase. So persons living in the district age 5 to 17 up by 2,000. We're assuming we're going to get 1,700 of those. So we're assuming that we are going to lose 15%.
You're going to lose 15% to homeschool and private school? Is that
Yep.
what you're suggesting?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Excuse me.
A recent study, and I'll try to find it and send it to you tomorrow, done by two researchers, I can't remember which university, predicts about 1 out of 16 Missouri kids that are school age are homeschooled now. Pre-pandemic, that was 1 in 30, so it's doubled, but it's about 6% of our student population in the state of Missouri is homeschooled now.
And we've seen steady upticks. You know, we had an expansion at, is it Summit Christian Academy? A few years back.
Yeah,
So-
they're about K-12, around a little over 1,100 kids. They were over 1,200 kids. They pull from, they tell us 70 zip codes, so it's not just Lee Summit, so it's harder to predict on that one. St. Michael's, which is 912, they're up to 470 this year. When they were like 430, I remember they told us it was about 190 kids, I think it was, that lived in our boundaries, because they pull from about 40 zip codes. So I think going off St. Michael's, a little less than half of their students live in our boundaries. And I don't know about Summit Christian other than they tell us it's about 70 zip codes.
I'm glad I don't drive that far to get my kid to school.
So you're suggesting out of the total growth, only 85% of it's going to make it to our schools,
Correct.
and the rest of them will be either homeschooled or private schooled?
Right.
Okay.
And that's up substantially from what we would have said
Right.
5
So
years ago.
how does the single-family home versus the multifamily home impact the dynamic with homeschooling and private schooling?
I'm not really sure that single-family, multifamily, plays into that, much at all. What plays into it is the value of the single-family.
Understood.
So if you're building a lot of expensive houses, you're gonna get richer people.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I'm actually kind of hopeful that the PRI lands are gonna bring in a little more variety in housing.
I have a question, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but if we looked at your predictions from 10 years ago, what would they look like where we're sitting today?
Except for COVID, pretty damn good.
I'd be interested in seeing that if that's possible, Dr. Buck. Can you get that information for us and provide it to the
If
board?
Rick can send it to Steve, and then.
I have it. Actually, I can just send you the link
Oh,
because
thank
I'm
you.
looking
Thank
at
you,
it right now.
Vice President Eslick, thank you.
COVID was a tough one. No one saw that kind of a dip coming. And the aging that has gone on too is more extreme probably than we would have expected. The birth rate crash, is really unprecedented.
Well, if we go into another recessionary period, like some people are predicting right now, how do you think that will affect these numbers that you've got projected up there now?
Depends on what happens. I think it's gonna, because my numbers are so driven on the success of the PRI project and more home building. Obviously, there could be an impact, could slow things down.
Yeah, so if we go into an economic downturn and nobody's building new homes, or very few new homes are being built.
I'm more worried about interest rates than I am the economy.
Understood.
I don't see a big economic downturn coming. Production levels are up. I just don't see it coming.
Okay, I mean, I'm just saying, some people are predicting that.
Yeah, I know.
And there's a lot of indicators. I mean, there's been a lot of layoffs and
That's
things
why I
like
don't like to
that
call
that have taken
myself an
place.
economist, because then I'd have to be predicting bad things to happen every other time.
Sure.
All right, Board Member Miller?
How often are you updating the district on its enrollment projections?
We had been doing it every year, and we didn't this year, because there wasn't a lot going on.
Okay. What are the different common variables? I know you've named some of them, but what are the different common variables that could change your projections?
Well, obviously, birth rates. I mean, we're talking about that. Probably the one that's changed things the most, that's sort of exogenous, besides birth rates, is prices. Prices and interest rates.
Sure.
I mean, people would love to live in your community. They just simply can't afford it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my last question is, has there been any significant changes that would have changed your projections from 2022 to now?
Well, definitely the higher interest rates, the way they've persisted, would probably be one thing. But other than that, I can't really think of anything. You know, our projections, you like the housing unit counts and stuff like that our last few years. We've done this enough. We've done it enough here. I visit every subdivision. We don't get caught by surprise in the short term much. We knew that these 2 years were going to be down. You know, we said that 3 years ago. These 2 years were going to be down. So it's pretty much happening as we expect.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Do you do similar work for additional school districts?
In Missouri, I've worked for Grandview and Liberty, Kearney, and St. Joe.
At what frequency did they bring you in to relook at the numbers? Was that yearly, every other year, every 3 years, twice a year? What does that look like?
Yeah, and sometimes people just want to study. You know, before you do a study every census just to figure out who your people were, you know. So some of them are just meant to be one-offs. But in a place where I'm actively involved, and I'm not doing Liberty currently, I decided that was just one district too many for me, but it was every year. I mean, when you're actively managing enrollment, I mean, I'm not free, but I'm pretty small line item on the budget.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions?
If I could have, PRI and North Kansas City and Liberty both had PRI land
Yes,
in
they
the
do.
past. Were you part of Liberty when PRI started developing up there? And can you explain the impact that had? I know I'm going back in history for you.
It's still going on, actually. I mean, they release land in what they call tranches. Now, I don't know what the history of the word tranche is, but they have released 2 or 3 tranches up in North Kansas City. And those projects, they're successful because they don't sell it until it's ready to be built. And so they are slower to proceed than most entities. And it's like they have a whole different philosophy about money than some of us do. And it's definitely a longer view of everything. But they do what they say they're going to do.
Vice President Eslick?
Okay. So I know you don't have this information in front of you, but I pulled up the study from 2019. And I know you had just mentioned that there was a housing development that didn't end up coming to fruition, and I'm kind of wondering about this number. So specifically looking at the projections back in 2019 for like Lee Summit Elementary, for example, Lee Summit Elementary was actually projected to grow a little bit and actually be well over 300 back in the 2019. So this is before COVID, I get that part. And these numbers also included 6th grade.
Which is a big difference.
So it was about 40 kids, just at that time frame. It was about 30 to 40 kids that made up, on average, the 6th grade class. So it started in 2020 at a projection of 300 students, and then increased up to peaking at 356 around 2025, and then kind of started to dip back down again for the 10-year projection at 313. So for that area, are you able to say whether that housing development you were talking about that didn't come to be, would that have at all impacted those numbers? Or what do you think was the reason for the assessment to see an increase and then it dips back down, but nowhere near the decline we see now?
Right. There was a project on the boards that the city was sponsoring. In fact, the ground has just been cleared. What direction is that? East of City Hall? Just immediately on the east side of City Hall, they just cleared about, 3 or 4 or 5 acres in there. And at one time, that was going to be low-income housing. Or at least part of it was going to be low-income, part of it was going to be market. And that didn't fly. That project got pulled.
Okay. well, that would explain it.
Yeah.
There was still decline projected for Westview. I didn't pull the sixth grade numbers there, but that one was still projected to decline, but I think we're still lower than what was projected at that point. Now, since Board Member Haley had mentioned a study from 10 years ago, I actually don't have 10 years. I have from 2015, 16 years, so pretty close, like 9 years. So, in the way back when machine, if we looked to what we were supposed to be enrollment-wise today for 2024-25 school year, we were projected to be total enrollment at 20,000. So we're, 2,500 kids roughly shy of that. So some of that can be COVID attrition, maybe 500 kids. And then we still have 2,000 to contend with on that 10-year projection. I only bring that up. 10 years is a long time. I understand that. But I look to like what we're looking at now, and it's a lot of uncertainty because that mark was missed by a couple thousand students. So who's to say what's going to happen? And maybe your projection included potentially that PRI land. And so that's kind of what the thought process was. And we're still kind of looking at that. So I don't know. It's hard to really put a lot of faith in a 10-year projection because, here we are 10 years later and we're not close to those numbers right now. So that's not really a question, I guess, but just more of an observation.
The housing market just hasn't rebounded. We're looking for new projects to start a long time before now that just have not come online. It's really that. It wasn't the demographic, like the age and income structure and all that kind of stuff. It isn't that. It's the fact that the projects just didn't materialize.
Gotcha.
And you have one builder, kind of Summit Builders was the entire market, for so long. And you only do what Summit does. And they've gone through some reorganization and some trouble that has slowed down, several of their projects.
One significant change this last year is that you talked about PRI, that's the nonprofit arm of the church. SLR is their for-profit. They did transfer of the 4,200 acres, 4,100 acres. They transferred 1,800 acres to the for-profit in the last year. So that's now, there's all kinds of interest letters, like you said, proposed projects that we've been waiting for that to happen. And all of a sudden now we have that happen. So there's a different clock all of a sudden on 1,800 acres within our community.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way.
Do we have any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
All right, so with that, this work session is closed.